on the deficit. That's what it was for. So the Republicans blew up that pillar, all designed to reduce the deficits, and instead repurposed it for increasing the deficits. Pillar number one drops. But at the same time, the second pillar, that no increase in deficits could occur after 10 years, was sustained by the chair sitting and presiding over the Senate. And that was Senator Daschle. And Senator Daschle said, well, actually, he asked the question. He was asking the question of the Republican chair. He said, if this reconciliation bill does not find a way to end or offset its tax cuts in the years beyond 2002, that is beyond 10 years, would the bill violate the Byrd Rule? And the presiding officer responded, yes, it would. So Pillar 2, no deficits in any category beyond 10 years, was preserved until now. Now, in 1996, and here we are 29 years later, and now there is a goal to destroy the second and third pillars of the 1974 bill. I must say this is extremely extraordinary and disturbing that my Republican colleagues who run on fiscal responsibility destroyed the first pillar of the special system to reduce deficits in 1996, and tonight they are proposing to destroy the second and third pillars. In that second pillar, no deficits beyond year 10. Every category, every year has to be deficit neutral or reduce the deficit. We can compare that to the law that has just been put forward, or the guidance that has just been put forward. We can look at year 11, the instructions that go in every category, year 12, 13, year 20, year 100. That goes on forever into the future. And the Republican bill guidance fails the Byrd test. Now, the Byrd test really gets applied in a second stage of the reconciliation process. We're in the budget resolution that sends instructions to committees. Those committees will send back specific revenue provisions, increase this revenue here, reduce it there, proceed to add this policy program, reduce this policy program. When it comes back, every category, that is every title of the reconciliation bill, in every single year, by the Byrd Rule, has to be deficit neutral or decrease the deficit. So we will have that debate. But we will have that debate when the reconciliation bill comes back from committee to this floor. Because my Republican colleagues decided to postpone that debate by taking the scoring rule out of their proposed budget resolution and said, we'll kick it down the road to the next stage. And certainly we will be here fiercely defending the deficit-reducing vision of Pillars 2 and 3. Pillar 2, no deficit in any category, any title of the bill beyond year 10. And Pillar 3, use honest numbers from the Congressional Budget Office. That pillar has survived since 1974. We even put that pillar into law specifically in 1985 in a bipartisan way. We wanted to emphasize how important that was. Just think about how much more important this process of deficit reduction, special rule of the reconciliation bill is today than it was back in 1974. In 1974, the debt to GDP ratio, 23%. Tonight, in 2025, it's 100%, equal to the entire gross domestic product of the United States. In 1974, the annual deficit was about $6 billion. Today, it's $2 trillion. 1974, total debt, $475 billion. Today, it's $37 trillion. Now, consider this. All of the debt run up over the last 249 years since the Declaration of Independence right now is just a little bit less than $37 trillion. In this single bill, Republicans are saying we will add $37 trillion more At least that much. When the numbers really come out, we expect it to be higher. 37 trillion more to the debt. That's a much bigger burden on the future. And what do the economists say about that bigger burden? They say it will increase the interest rates that families have to pay on their mortgage and on their car loan. Says it will decrease the capital available to private industry and slow down our economy. This magic math goes by the name of current policy baseline. It sounds very academic, but it is essentially the big lie. Consider this. You sign a contract to rent a home for a year, and renting that home costs $2,000 per month, so you know you're going to have to pay $24,000 over the year. And at the end of the year, you say, you know what? I'm going to renew that agreement to rent this apartment. And your spouse says, you know what? That's going to cost us another $24,000 in rent. And you say, no, I'm using the Republican magic math. It won't cost a single dime, because we'll just pretend that a year ago we had planned to rent the apartment for a second year. And therefore, it's no more than we thought we would pay a year ago, except a year ago you said you're only going to rent the house for a year. In other words, it's a big lie. It is the very smoke and mirrors, the very gimmicks that Democrats and Republicans came together and stopped back in 1974. 51 years ago, we said this game of lying to the public has to end. But tonight, my Republican colleagues are saying that game will continue if they have their way. Well, we say they must not have their way. We are going to stand up and say no to families lose and billionaires win. We are going to say no to magic math that lies to the American people about the cost of their bill, driven by massive tax cuts to the richest Americans. It's a simple request: honesty and integrity. We should not be engaging in a big lie, and Democrats will have no part of it. We are going to be honest about what every provision of the reconciliation bill costs. We are going to be determined to make sure that the Byrd rule stands. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Democratic Whip.
Madam President, this has been an amazing week in the United States Senate, and I've served here for over 25 years. Just 2 days ago, our colleague Cory Booker from the state of New Jersey ended a filibuster on the floor after 25 hours. Broke the record, longest speech in the history of the Senate. And an impassioned speech it was. I was happy to be here for a major part of it. There was a big celebration on our side of the aisle, and the galleries were filled in a way I've never seen before, cheering Cory Booker for his achievement. It's a moment when all of us who serve in the Senate, lucky enough to serve in the Senate, will remember the rest of our lives. But I remember another moment that affected more people than this miraculous feat by Cory Booker. It was July 28th of 2017. It was 2:30 in the morning. I was seated at this desk, and a historic vote was about to take place. The vote was whether or not we would keep the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as it was known then, extending health insurance to millions of Americans, some of who never had it. At the time, President Trump was in office, and he and the majority of Republicans were determined to eliminate the Affordable Care Act, to eliminate the insurance that millions of American families depended on to protect their kids and themselves. It was as close as possible vote. In the end, at least 3 Republican senators voted to save the Affordable Care Act. But the one key vote, and the one I remember, was John McCain. John McCain, an extraordinary man, served this country in ways that we can hardly ask anyone else to serve. Prisoner of war for over 5 years during Vietnam. Came battling back and elected to the U.S. Senate from Arizona. And he was a real maverick. You never knew where John was going to end up, but you always wanted to end up with him if you could, because it was always a spirited contest and he usually won it. And this vote was dragged out for a long period of time at 2:30 in the morning, for goodness sakes. And somebody said, John McCain is the last person to vote. But he's been called out off the Senate floor to go into a room behind and take a telephone call from Donald Trump. Donald Trump, president in his first term, was asking John McCain to cast the deciding vote to eliminate the Affordable Care Act, health insurance coverage for millions of Americans. Madam President, I sat here and I watched as John McCain came in from that phone call, and no one knew what he was going to do. Really, no one knew. John was the kind of person you could never quite be sure. And he walked in the well near the table where the Republicans gathered for votes, and he stood there, and he barely raised his left arm because it was broken while he was a prisoner of war, just enough to get his thumb up and go, no. No. That was it. John McCain, with that no vote, saved the Affordable Care Act, and millions of Americans' health insurance was protected. This was during Trump's first administration, and he had other priorities, and they certainly didn't include Obamacare. He wanted to eliminate it. But John McCain's courage came through that night. He broke with his party because he knew what was at stake. He knew that for millions of Americans, there was no alternative when it came to health insurance. It was the Affordable Care Act or nothing. And he had the guts to vote no. Oh, he was pilloried and criticized by the Republican faithful from one end of the country to the other. But those of us who believe he did the right thing will never forget that moment of courage. In a strange way, today, Thursday, April 3rd, 2025, we are returning to that moment in history. The Republicans under President Trump in his second term want to perpetuate his tax cut that he gave primarily to the wealthiest people in America and add to it at the expense of health care for America. When we talk about health care in America, one of the programs that is so critical is called Medicaid. In days gone by, Medicaid was a rarely used health insurance plan for the poorest and disabled people in America. But it's changed. It's become much different. And let me tell you why that's an interesting context for where we stand now. Many Americans from coast to coast follow the stock market today. The reaction of the stock market to the Trump tariff tax and the chaos that's been created since he announced we were going into a trade war with virtually every nation on earth. They watched carefully as the stock market reacted to it today. The Dow Jones average, which is supposed to be an indicator of the state of the economy, lost 4% of its value today. I don't know what that means for most people, but I know that most people watch it because it involves their own health, their own retirement plans, IRAs and 401ks and other plans that they have based on the value of stock. There has to be a sinking feeling, I'm sure there is in many households and families across America, to see so much of value that they've saved up for a lifetime disappear in one day, reacting to the Trump tariff tax and what it meant across the country. And here we come this evening, the same day as this Dow Jones plunge of 4%, to discuss what? Health care again under President Trump. And this time it's connected to retirement and savings and the future of a lot of families. Let me tell you a story about one. I'm going to try to mask the details because I don't want anyone to reflect on the actual person. But he's a friend of mine, and he's a professional in Illinois. Wonderful guy, community leader, and he had a beautiful family. Still does for that matter. But his wife developed Alzheimer's. this lovely woman reached the point where she had to be put into a care facility to take care of her day to day. Breaks my heart to even think about it, but it was a fact. He didn't see it coming. There's no way he could have. But for years now, she has survived physically, while mentally she has deteriorated to the point where she cannot communicate with him or others. It's an expensive undertaking, that type of care facility. He can afford it, but many people can't. So what do? What happens when your mother or grandmother, when someone you dearly love in your family reaches a point where they need this kind of care? Well, you do what you can, the best you can, with your own savings and your own resources. But ultimately, the major source of funding for people who are in these facilities is Medicaid. If you cut Medicaid reimbursement, it limits the opportunity for these people to get good professional care. People you love, people who've broken your hearts because of their illness, but you want to give them the very best in the parting years of their lives. So when you cut Medicaid, which is going to be proposed by this Republican budget resolution, it's at the expense of families' peace of mind and resources they've saved for their own future, their own retirement. That isn't the only one. In the state of Illinois, half of the children who are born in the state are paid for by the Medicaid system. What happens if you cut back on Medicaid reimbursement in those cases? It means less prenatal care. The likelihood, I'm sorry to say, that kids, some will be born with problems that could have been avoided, and more seriously, whether or not these children may even survive birth. That's what Medicaid is all about. We're talking about cutting health coverage for those in care facilities as well as those in hospitals who are giving birth. Why? Why would the Republicans even suggest that we cut this? Just like they did years ago when John McCain cast that deciding vote. Why, under a Trump presidency, do they go after health care first? Why is that their target? They believe that the vulnerable people who receive this kind of health care assistance won't be able to fight back. And they are desperate to raise more revenue. For what purpose? To give tax cuts to the wealthiest people in America. For goodness sakes. Elon Musk does not need a tax cut. He's a multi-billionaire, the wealthiest man in the world. Why in the world would we cut back on any kind of health care for Americans to give a man in that station in life a tax break? And that's what it's all about. But there's more to the story. I'm honored to represent Illinois. I love the whole state. It's where I was born. And I'm honored to represent the great city of Chicago. Oh, it's controversial. There's some people downstate Illinois say they go off and be their own state. We're tired of them. I'm not one of those people. I am proud of the fact that Chicago is part of our state. But my roots are in downstate Illinois. I'm born in East St. Louis, raising my family in Springfield. I have lived in and represented the smaller communities downstate and the rural areas. That's how I got to Congress in the first place, and that's how I stayed in the United States Senate. What are these cuts that the Republicans are proposing in Medicaid going to do to rural and downstate Illinois and other rural and downstate areas around the nation? The reality is very clear. Fewer resources to hospitals in sparsely populated areas mean that many of those hospitals will not survive. Today, more than half of those hospitals are hanging by a thread, operating in the red. And to cut Medicaid reimbursement to those hospitals is literally going to close their doors and turn out their lights. How important is a little hospital in a community downstate? It is the economic engine. It is the hub of life for the economy of that area. Take away that hospital and it not only endangers the people living around it, it also means a lot of jobs are lost too. And businesses that those people frequent often are going to be threatened as well. So why would we cut Medicaid reimbursement and close these downstate hospitals to give a tax break to the wealthiest people in America? It makes no sense. Where are our priorities? Where is our humanity to even consider that? I don't understand on the other side of the aisle how Republican senators, many of whom represent small town America too, and really care in their hearts about it, can stand by and let this happen. The net result of this is going to be the quality of life threatened by the people who live in those areas. I want to tell you a story about a community that I visited 2 weeks ago, two communities. One was Taylorville, Illinois. And I asked the hospital administrator in Taylorville, which is about 30 miles from Springfield, to come and invite other hospital administrators from the area and tell me what the Medicaid cuts proposed by the Republicans to give tax breaks to the wealthy will mean to these hospitals. To a person, they said the same thing. They may survive, but it's a big question. And what difference will it make? Well, in some of these hospitals, it means that instead of 30 minutes drive to the hospital to deliver the baby, it'll be an hour and 30 minutes. I can still remember our first babies in my family. The thought of being in a car for an hour and a half with my wife in labor would scare me to death. But that would be the reality for many people, and alternatives are just not available. Why in the world would we reach a point where we would cut that kind of coverage, that kind of protection, that peace of mind to give tax breaks to the wealthiest people? It makes no sense. Medicaid and the CHIP program cover nearly 40 million children, half of all the kids in America. Medicaid provides health coverage for 60% of seniors in nursing homes, the ones I mentioned earlier. And it's the largest funder of addiction and mental health treatment. I will tell you, I know the cases pretty well of people who are desperate for addiction treatment. They realize that they are addicted, they realize they have a problem, and they're anxious to get started in cleaning their lives up. Medicaid is the source of funding for that kind of counseling. And to cut back on that is to really sentence these people to a lifetime of fear and sadly cost many of their lives. In Illinois, 3.4 million people are enrolled in Medicaid, 1.5 million children. Under Republican plans to slash Medicaid, 775,000 adults in Illinois who gained health insurance thanks to the Affordable Care Act, the same one that John McCain saved in the first Trump presidency, would lose their coverage almost overnight. How would you like to be in a situation where you don't have health insurance at a critical moment? I know. I was there. I was a student at Georgetown Law School, got married in my second year, and God sent us a beautiful little baby girl right away. We were so happy, and then a few weeks after she was born, we learned she had a serious congenital heart defect. I was a law student. I didn't have much income, and I had no health insurance. And so my wife and I took our little baby girl over to Children's Hospital here in Washington, D.C. We sat in the charity ward, and we waited until our name was called. And we saw a doctor who I prayed to God would be able to save my baby's life. I never felt more helpless in my life than I did at that moment. To have this little girl come into this world, and her father couldn't provide health insurance. Luckily, she survived. Great people did great favors for our family that I'll never forget. And I've never forgotten that whenever there's a health crisis or a health issue that's debated on this floor. All of us want good health insurance. And to cut the programs for no reason other than to give tax breaks to the wealthiest people makes no sense whatsoever. It is not sensible, it's not thoughtful, it is not humane. That is what this debate is all about. Are we going to protect health insurance for Americans so that they have some peace of mind that they have access to good care? Or are we going to cut them off, tell them they're on their own, whether it's mental health counseling, addiction counseling, the birth of a child, or basic health care? That's what's at stake here. That is what is at stake. And so I would plead with my colleagues, and I know that it's unlikely. I've seen the votes. I know the discipline, party discipline. I've seen it on my side of the aisle. I'm sure it's on the other side of the aisle. But I'm praying to God there's going to be one or two John McCains who are going to step forward and lift their hand enough to vote and save health insurance for Americans across the board. I know that some people will be unhappy. In fact, some may threaten to defeat you politically because of it. But I'm sure that after John voted no and saved the Affordable Care Act, despite President Trump's telephone call in his first term, John had the satisfaction of knowing that for millions of Americans, he was the man and his vote was the vote that made the difference. It might have denied some tax breaks for some wealthy people, but for others it gave them peace of mind. John was just enough of a maverick to be willing and able to do it. He will be fondly remembered in history as a result. So, Madam President, I'm going to close by saying that this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart, and I think to a lot of other people too. They've gone through experiences much like my own, and I know they realize that we have few moments of opportunity and service in the Senate to really make a difference in the lives of American families, to give hope to people who have given up because of a mother who's in a nursing home or because of a child with an illness. I've received letters. Sophia, a single mom from Palatine, Illinois. 17 years of her age, she gave birth to a baby boy. Her son was born with many medical complications. He had to undergo 2 surgeries in his first day of life. Can you imagine? By the age 4, he had undergone 8 separate surgical procedures to address ongoing medical challenges. How did Sophia Palatine afford the life-saving care for her son? He was covered by Medicaid. She wrote to my office, she said, "I don't want Medicaid. My son needs Medicaid. I could not be able to afford the thousands of dollars of medical care to keep him alive without it." Amber from Springfield told my office in no uncertain terms, "You cut Medicaid and you endanger my sick child's life." That's what it is. It's a life and death issue. It's not for how many dollars you're going to have left over when you file your taxes. It's a life and death issue that we're debating. I want to thank those who have spoken this evening already, Senator Schumer, Senator Merkley, for their leadership on this issue. And I just plead with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, please, there's got to be someone over there who will step up and have a McCain moment that will save health care for millions of Americans. I'm praying that it happens. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Wisconsin.
Madam President, I rise today on behalf of the 1.2 million Wisconsinites who rely on Medicaid, or as we call it in Wisconsin, Badger Care, for their health insurance. And I rise today in their defense because their health care is under attack. And I really want to focus right now kind of taking off where Senator Durbin left off, talking about our children, our babies. 1 in 3 children in Wisconsin rely on Medicaid for their health insurance. That's 1 in 3 children in Wisconsin's urban, suburban, and rural counties who need Medicaid just to see a doctor or to get regular checkups or to get vaccines and to stay healthy. I've traveled across Wisconsin meeting with constituents who are terrified about what these cuts will mean for their families, their finances, and their health. And I'd like to share a few of those stories with you this evening. I think about people like Megan from Wisconsin, a single mother of 2 young children who relies on Medicaid so that her kids can get regular checkups and see the dentist. She reached out to me to share that without Medicaid, her entire paycheck would go to just keeping her children healthy, with nothing left over to pay for rent or keep food on the table. I heard from Shelley in Lake Holcomb, Wisconsin, who reached out to me about her 17-year-old daughter, Chloe. Chloe was diagnosed with leukemia last October. Chloe receives chemotherapy 5 days a week, and her parents drive her almost an hour each way to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, so that she can get the treatments that she needs. Without Medicaid, the cost of Chloe's treatment would force Shelley and parents like her to make an impossible choice between financial ruin or not getting the care that they need for their children. I've also heard from dozens of Wisconsin families whose children live with disabilities. They are terrified of what financial cuts will mean for their kids' future and their family's finances. Jennifer in Wauwatosa wrote to my office about her son, Will. Will is a 15-year-old sophomore at Wauwatosa West, who she described as vibrant and loving. Will also has Down syndrome, which, among other medical care, has meant that he's needed a total of 11 ear tube surgeries just so that he can hear. Jennifer wrote me that the math on those costs to their family is pretty simple. 11 surgeries, which cost $10,000 each, without insurance, would cost her family $110,000. She said without Medicaid, she and her husband would struggle to give their children the lives they deserve, including paying for their other sons' college tuition. She wrote, "If Medicaid is cut, we will struggle financially. We will not be able to get Will the support he needs to be independent, to get a job and go to college. It could even mean one of us having to leave our full-time employment, which could hurt even more. Please don't cut Medicaid," she said. I also heard from Brooke in Thorpe, Wisconsin. She shared that because of Medicaid and the speech therapy for her 4-year-old son that he receives, she has, for the first time this year, heard his voice utter more than one syllable. Imagine that. She wrote, and I quote, "It marks the first time I have been called mom by him, and I have heard 'I love you' come from him 3 times, all occurring in the last 12 months. He receives speech therapy 5 days a week to learn how to express himself, to process emotions, and to regulate. This has changed his life, and these therapies are paid for by Medicaid. Don't allow people like me to only hear 'love you' a handful of times simply because of a budget cut." We can talk about the number of children who will be impacted by cuts to Medicaid, a total of over 30 million nationwide. While that number is staggering, it's important to remember that every single child who relies on Medicaid has a story like Chloe's or Will's. And they have parents like Megan and Brooke who just want what's best for their children and are terrified about their future if Medicaid is taken away. If my colleagues on the Republican side want to go through with cuts, the ones laid out in the House's budget plan, it's these families Republicans must answer to. Donald Trump and congressional Republicans can explain why they are planning to rip away health care for children so that the top 1% can get richer. I, for one, would like them to answer for the chaos, for the fear, for the heartache they are causing families in my state. I yield.
Madam President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Madam President. And I want to thank my colleague from Wisconsin, Senator Baldwin, for such excellent, poignant, moving descriptions of the real cost of this budget plan that we are on the floor to consider tonight. I rise today to join my colleagues and the people of New Hampshire in standing up against the attempt by the Trump administration and some of my Republican colleagues to effectively end Medicaid as we know it and add $37 trillion over the next 30 years to our national debt, all in order to pay for more tax giveaways for corporate special interests and billionaires. Americans of every political stripe are alarmed because this bid to end Medicaid as we know it will lead to more families, more children, becoming sick and unable to get care, And because ending Medicaid as we know it will devastate our economy, weaken our workforce, and most of all, make our people less free. Medicaid is a pillar of America's healthcare system. Tens of millions of Americans, including working Americans, pregnant women, and millions of children depend on Medicaid every day for routine care, for treatment for chronic illnesses, for life-saving care from serious illnesses, for treatment for addiction, and for much more. No legislation has done more to allow more Americans to live longer and healthier lives than the bills that established Medicaid and Medicare and the efforts that followed to strengthen both of these landmark laws. So before we proceed, let's take a step back for a moment and remember that Congress created Medicaid for two simple reasons. Prior to Medicaid's creation, a great swath of our country, tens of millions of Americans, were forced to try and get by without health care. For many working people and their families, the kind of routine and preventive care that many today take for granted were luxuries. Serious illnesses were often left untreated, becoming virtual death sentences. We established and later expanded Medicaid because we understood that in a country as great as ours, we don't turn our backs on our neighbors. But we also created Medicaid because we know that it is in all of our economic interest to have more healthy people. When more people are healthy and able to work, they can get ahead and stay ahead, provide a better life for their family, join the workforce, and in so doing, make our economy stronger. There is, of course, much more work to do to make health care more affordable for all of our people. But Medicaid saves lives. Over the course of the program's history, Medicaid has allowed hundreds of millions of Americans who otherwise would be uninsured to live healthier lives and to build a future. But now the Trump administration and some of my Republican colleagues are poised to end Medicaid as we know it in order to pay for tax breaks for corporate special interests and billionaires. The Republican plan to eviscerate Medicaid would be devastating to our country. The Republican plan is, unsurprisingly, short on details. But they've put forward proposals that, if you do the math, means cutting a third of federal Medicaid funding, all to give billionaires and corporate special interests a tax break. Now let's look at what this decidedly unreasonable, outrageous, and dangerous plan would do. Cutting Medicaid by a third means living in a country where millions of children no longer have health care, a country where more of our friends and neighbors get sick and can't afford to see a doctor, or a country where more of our friends and neighbors stay out of the workforce because they can't afford treatments for chronic conditions like lupus, making them too sick to work. A country where families who have children with disabilities can't find adequate coverage to provide the kind of complex care, both at home and in school, that these children need. One issue in particular I want to highlight is the way in which slashing Medicaid would weaken our fight against addiction. New Hampshire has been hit hard by the fentanyl crisis. These Medicaid cuts could kick hundreds of thousands of people struggling with addiction off of Medicaid, out of treatment, and off the road to recovery. This will, among other things, make law enforcement's job even harder, and it will make our children less safe. So let's be clear about what the Republican plan to slash Medicaid will do. It will make people less healthy. It will weaken our workforce and hurt our economy. The fight against fentanyl will only get tougher, and more people will die who otherwise could have lived. If the administration's plan to eviscerate Medicaid, the cuts only appear on the page as percentages and dollar signs, but their impact will be felt by real people. My office, as has Senator Baldwin's and Senator Kim's, Senator Durbin's, been deluged with letters and calls from constituents who are concerned about the administration's attack on Medicaid. I could tell you hundreds of stories, but instead I'll just give you 3. There's Michelle from Manchester. She was diagnosed with a rare and frequently fatal form of cancer that upended her career and her life. To go through the long process of cancer treatment by paying out of pocket would be daunting, perhaps even prohibitive for most anyone. But Michelle was covered by Medicaid. She got the care that she needed. She got healthy. She was able to go back to work. She's now cancer-free because of her courage and strength and because she was covered by Medicaid. Then there's Noah from Merrimack. Now, Noah's 20 years old and experiences disabilities and is blind. She's had to face challenges that few of us can imagine. But thanks in part to the support that she's received through Medicaid, she's been able to have many of the opportunities that all parents want for their kids and that all kids want for themselves. She has a part-time job at a nearby bank. She does charity work delivering flowers to seniors. She loves horseback riding and has competed as a Special Olympian. She accomplished all this thanks to her bravery, optimism, and generosity, but she may not have even gotten that chance without Medicaid. And then there's Sherry from Lebanon. Like other Granite Staters, she's had struggles with addiction, as well as some mental health challenges. But Sherry was eligible for Medicaid. She got treatment and went into recovery. She was able to go back to work. Today, Sherry is a perinatal peer support educator and coordinator for Dartmouth Health. She helps families every day. Because she got care when she needed it, she's now working to provide care for others, touching untold and unknown numbers of lives through her work. And she was my guest this year at the President's Joint Address to Congress. But none of her recovery, employment, and life-saving work would have been possible or happened without Medicaid. So if the administration intends to eviscerate Medicaid, if they intend to go through with their plan to cut Medicaid by 1/3 to pay for a tax break for billionaires, then before they do, they should at least stop and explain, of these 3 people, Michelle, Noah, Sherry, who is the one that they want to kick off of Medicaid? How would any of us be better off if any of these 3 people are forced to go without health care? Most Americans are proud of our capacity to come together and ensure that our friends and neighbors can get health care and be able to work and raise families. But this administration evidently considers the provision of life-saving health care to Americans from all walks of life to be a problem. Now, beyond the huge price tag of this budget plan, a plan that explodes the deficit by $37 trillion more over 30 years. And let's be clear, the Republican budget writers are going to use accounting gimmicks to try to hide this cost. And let's be clear, too, that the $37 trillion in additional debt won't be used to improve health care. It's to pay for tax breaks for billionaires. But there is another cost to the president's attacks on Medicaid. Because as important as it is that we protect the health care provided by Medicare, and that's tremendously important, protecting Medicaid health care marks neither the beginning nor the end of what we need to do to improve health care in our country and make it more affordable. We need to confront real challenges in our country's health care system. Big Pharma keeps drug prices too high. We have the best doctors in the world, but too few people can afford to see them. Too many Americans live with chronic diseases. Labor and delivery centers across our country are more and more scarce, and rural hospitals are struggling. Americans need to summon our best ideas and our best efforts to meet these challenges, but we will not make progress so long as this administration continues to keep us trapped in old debates and tries to unravel bipartisan support for the progress that we have already made. Of course, it doesn't have to be this way. When I was governor of New Hampshire, we managed to expand Medicaid and balance the budget at the same time, and we did both on a bipartisan basis. We did it with the support of many business leaders and law enforcement leaders who didn't always vote the same way come November, but they did agree that we're all better off when people are healthy. President Trump and congressional Republicans are presenting us with a false choice. We don't have to choose between keeping the status quo on the one hand and blowing up our healthcare system on the other. We don't have to buy the falsehood that somehow we have to close rural hospitals and throw seniors out of our nursing homes to improve our healthcare system. There are better ideas, and a whole lot of them are bipartisan. There's bipartisan bills right now to lower the cost for patients when they go to the doctor by implementing something called site neutrality. There are bipartisan bills that will lower drug costs by bringing more generic drugs to market. But these ideas only help if there's a functioning healthcare system to build on. A functioning healthcare system, as challenged as it is, that includes Medicaid. As Americans, we don't shrink from challenges. We don't surrender to cynicism and lies. We work together. We do hard things. We do what it takes to build a better future for our country, and we do it in a way that brings all of us along together. And that includes ensuring that all of us have health care. That's the way we created Medicaid. That's the way we expanded Medicaid. And it's through that same spirit of hard work and optimism that we can overcome the healthcare challenges of today if we can summon the political will to do it, a will that has been so sorely lacking since this president arrived on the scene. The Senate should not pass a budget that rips health care away from millions of Americans, 60,000 of whom live in my state, just to give tax cuts to billionaires. But that is what this budget will do. It's un-American, and it is shameful. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to tell the stories of the nearly 2 million New Jerseyans who rely on Medicaid for their critical care. I do this because their care is at risk. I do this because the care of more than 72 million Americans across our country enrolled in Medicaid is at risk. They are at risk because Republicans in the House and the Senate have chosen to take away their care so that Elon Musk and the very richest Americans can pay a little less in taxes. That is the choice that they have thrust upon the American people. It's a choice that I don't believe they truly understand. So I'd like to take some of my time today on the floor to explain what happens when we choose Elon Musk's well-being over the people we've sworn to serve. To truly understand this, you need to understand that for tens of millions of Americans, Medicaid is their lifeline from the womb to their final years. In New Jersey, nearly 1 out of 3 births is covered by Medicaid. But even before that birth takes place, mothers receive prenatal care covered by Medicaid. That means for millions of parents across the country, the first images they see of their child in those early ultrasounds are because of Medicaid. It means that prenatal vitamins that provide the folic acid necessary to ensure proper development are because of Medicaid. It means that if there is a complication in pregnancy, that those parents can focus on their health and the health of their unborn child, not whether or not they'll be able to cover the costs of their care. That is because of Medicaid. So when Republicans are saying we need to cut Medicaid, remember that it's Elon Musk who wins and those expecting parents who lose. When those children are born into the world, tens of millions rely on Medicaid. Nationally, about 40% of children are enrolled in Medicaid or CHIP. In New Jersey, 1/3 of children, 1 in 3 kids in my state are enrolled in Medicaid. Now, as a father of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, I can tell you that the most important thing is knowing that your kids are healthy. There are a lot of things that are outside of your control as a parent. You can do everything right, but sometimes you just need help. Kids get sick, and having that assurance that they can get the care that they need is an important thing. When you take away Medicaid, you're not just taking away, you're taking away the peace of mind that parents deserve. You're taking away the ability for parents to look their kids in the eye and say, it's going to be okay. I wanted to share with you two stories that have stuck with me. I heard from Nicole, a mother from New Jersey who has a developmentally disabled son, Jordan. Jordan is 24. His mother said that Medicaid cut would be, quote, catastrophic. She said that the care she receives from Medicaid is vitally important. That sense of importance and urgency I heard from Nicole, I just saw echoed from Jamie from Hazlitt. Jamie's son, David, was born paralyzed, nonverbal, and he's relying on a feeding tube. Jamie told reporters that one of David's medications can cost up to $1,000 a month. She said that if Republicans are successful in cutting Medicaid, quote, we would have to choose, are we going to eat, pay the bills, or keep him alive? She said, quote, it's a life or death situation. So when Republicans are talking about cutting Medicaid to hand tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans, the choice they are making is to leave people like Nicole and Jordan, like Jamie and David, behind. At some point, our children grow up and leave. But even then, so many across this country rely on Medicaid for their basic care. In New Jersey, 1 in 7 adults between the ages of 19 and 64 are covered by Medicaid. So when we look at the choice ahead of us between care and tax cuts for the super rich, I want you to think about Caroline from Mount Holly. Caroline called my office asking that I oppose this budget plan. When she outlined her reason for not cutting Medicaid, she spoke in the clearest possible terms. She said, quote, I will die if there are cuts to Medicaid. Caroline is disabled. Her daughter takes care of her through the Managed Long-Term Services and Support Program. She ended her message by saying, please, I need help. A lot of us need your help. These are the people that need help, not Elon Musk, not the billionaires. It's like people like Caroline from Hackettstown. Caroline called my office because her brother is on Medicaid. He's scheduled to get heart surgery in the next couple of months, something that is scary enough when you got the uncertainty of health care. But Caroline doesn't have that if her brother's Medicaid is cut. She said, I'm really scared for him. I'm really scared for my parents who are about to retire. I'm scared for myself, someone who also has multiple health care issues and is trying to keep down a full-time job despite it all. These are the people that need help. Our neighbors who sometimes need the help most are those who are disabled. In New Jersey, 1 out of every 3 working-age adults with a disability is on Medicaid. Just last month, I invited Kevin Nunez, a disabled New Jerseyan, an advocate for his community, down to the Capitol. Kevin relies on Medicaid for his care, his caregiver, his basic quality of life. I brought him to the Capitol because I wanted Donald Trump to have to face someone whose health care he was threatening to take away. But it wasn't just Kevin there at the Capitol. We saw his caregiver, Edna, there. The work she does every day is truly incredible. We should support our caregivers, should honor their service, and cutting the funding that allows them to do their job is not the way to do that. Kevin is one of more than 15.5 million people across America with a disability who is covered by Medicaid. He is one of approximately 4.5 million people who use Medicaid for home care workers like Edna. The choice we are facing is abandoning those Americans like Kevin and Edna who just need basic care, or giving another tax cut to those at the very top. For me, that's not a choice. Finally, as we go through adulthood and age, Medicaid becomes more important than ever. Seniors across our nation are relying on Medicaid for the care that they need to live. 60% of nursing home residents in New Jersey use Medicaid to pay for care. When seniors are on a fixed income, like so many of them are, Medicaid can be the difference between life or death. Annie, a teacher in New Jersey, called my office recently. Her mother is on Medicaid, 71 years old, recently had hip surgery. She has no other income than her Social Security and asks that we do everything we can to make sure her Medicaid isn't cut. As someone who is not just a father of 2 young kids, but as a caretaker of an older parent, it weighs on me. And I understand the challenges that are there. Knowing that you have to do everything you can to make sure that the people you love have the care that they need. Life is hard enough. Care is hard enough. The point of Medicaid, the point of government is to make it a little easier, a little more bearable. So when Republicans come to the floor with a budget that threatens to cut Medicaid so they can give tax cuts and tax breaks to the ultra-rich, the choice they're putting before us is making your lives worse to make their lives better. It's making your health care worse to make their bank accounts bigger. It's making your future more uncertain to make their futures brighter. That can't be an acceptable choice. It's not one we have to make. We can reject this budget resolution and save Medicaid, save health care. We can reject this budget resolution and choose to support that expecting mother who just wants to give birth to a healthy child. We can reject this budget resolution and choose to support that child as they grow. We can reject this budget resolution and choose to support our neighbors who work hard but just need that little bit of help to stay healthy and achieve the American dream. And finally, we can reject this budget resolution and choose to support our seniors who we owe the best care to them in their golden years. This is a moment to show the 2 million New Jerseyans on Medicaid, the nearly 80 million Americans on Medicaid, and every other American across this country that we choose their well-being over the wealth and power of those who already have plenty. Let's reject this budget resolution and do the right thing for them. Thank you, and I yield back.
Senator from Kansas.
Good. Okay. Madam President, I have 6 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the appointment at the desk appear separately in the record as if made by the chair.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stands adjourned until 8 a.m. on Friday, April the 4th, that following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the time for the 2 leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, morning business be closed, and the Senate resume consideration of Cal number 38, H-Con Resolution 14. Further, that all time during adjournments and leaders' remarks count equally between proponents and opponents on the current resolution.
Without objection, so ordered.
If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order following the remarks of my Democratic colleagues.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise this evening once again to highlight Wisconsinites' stories who would be impacted by cuts to Medicaid that my Republican colleagues are proposing. Earlier this evening, I talked about children. Babies are most vulnerable. Now I'd like to talk about older adults. I rise to share the story of Renee. Renee is a 60-year-old woman. She lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And in October of 2023, Renee was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. It had metastasized to her brain, her lungs, and liver. She depended upon Medicaid for that diagnosis through a program that Congress created. And she also depends on Medicaid, or Badger Care as we call it in the state of Wisconsin, for her treatment. Without Medicaid, she said, and I'll quote her, "I would be forced to ration or forego cancer treatment, hastening my death, or send me and my husband into bankruptcy trying to keep me alive," end quote. In March last month, I brought Renee to President Trump's State of the Union address to show this president who his massive cuts to Medicaid will hurt. Medicaid provides health coverage to 7.2 million seniors nationwide. That's millions of Americans, just like Renee, who rely on Medicaid for the life-saving treatment that they need. I also heard from Linda. Linda lives in Viroqua, Wisconsin, where her husband and she run a dairy farm that they bought nearly 22 years ago. Linda served her community for 30 years as a registered nurse, working primarily with new moms and babies before she was forced to retire due to chronic health issues. Since then, she and her husband have relied on Medicaid and he on Medicare for their health care because they cannot afford other types of insurance. Like so many dairy farms in the state of Wisconsin, Linda and her husband work on very tight margins, made even tighter by Trump's first-term tariffs, which, according to Linda, put us into poverty. This was in Trump's first term. Now they are staring down another Trump trade war and wonder how it's going to impact their dairy operation. She wrote, "I'm not proud that I have to use Medicaid and Medicare for insurance, but at 63 years of age, it appears that I will not be able to work at a job that provides health coverage or a living wage. If the cuts in Medicaid become a reality, not only will we be homeless, but we will not be able to access the health care and drug coverage we need to have a quality of life. We never thought we would need government health care, but here we are, and the outlook has darkened considerably for many dairy farmers since January. This fight to protect Medicaid for seniors is personal to me and thousands of Wisconsinites. My own mother relied on Medicaid at the end of her life to afford nursing home care, as do the majority of Wisconsinites in skilled nursing homes. 6 in 10 residents in our state's nursing homes use Medicaid, or over 10,000 seniors who might not be able to otherwise afford to have a safe roof over their heads. Medicaid also supports more than 43,000 elderly or disabled adults who receive long-term care at home in our community. That includes people like Tammy in Monona, Wisconsin, whose father, Bud, battled dementia at the end of his life. Medicaid allowed Tammy's dad to stay in his home for the last 5 years of his life with the support of at-home caregivers. She wrote to me, and I quote, "People should be able to choose where and how they spend their last days in life. And Medicaid allowed my dad to stay in his own home with familiar surroundings that helped ground him when his dementia was the most challenging for him. Please continue funding Medicaid to be able to help other frail elders stay in their own homes." There are so many pleas that I hear from my constituents in every corner of our state. And it's these constituents that I hope President Trump and congressional Republicans are listening to when they think about ripping away Medicaid to pay for their tax cuts for big corporations and billionaires. Seniors like Renee and Linda know that Medicaid is a lifeline for Americans who otherwise would have nowhere to turn. It's Wisconsinites who will face bankruptcy just to stay well, who will pay for Donald Trump's giveaway to the top 1%. I cannot believe that my Republican colleagues are even considering a plan that is so backward and so cruel for hardworking Wisconsinites and seniors. This is wrong, And we must continue to fight back and say loudly and clearly, hands off Medicaid. I yield.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, we're back here again with another variation on the Trump plan and the Republican plan to do further damage to our economy and to the working men and women of this country. It's been sliced and diced and repackaged and unpackaged, but it still boils down to a very simple equation. Big tax cuts for the very, very wealthy and cuts to Medicaid and other key programs that are essential to Americans. This resolution is going to cost a lot of money, about $5.8 trillion with a T. Now, today, President Trump unveiled, or yesterday, I should say, unveiled his tariff policies, and today, the markets reacted. They lost $2.5 trillion in value. So he is just taking a sledgehammer to our economy and a sledgehammer to the working families who depend upon these programs like Medicaid, and a sledgehammer to our universities and medical schools and research laboratories, which have made us the premier center for research, innovation, and healthcare in the world. And with these sledgehammer blows, I don't think we can maintain that status. These proposals by the President and my Republican colleagues are designed to take away the health care coverage from millions of Americans, seniors, kids, veterans, individuals with disabilities. And they particularly seem to focus on Medicaid. Now, Medicaid provides essential health care services for the most vulnerable populations of the country. It covers nearly 80 million people if you combine those covered by the Children's Health Insurance Plan, CHIP. In my home state of Rhode Island, over 300,000 people, and that's about 1/3 of my state, depend on Medicaid. And the Republicans are talking about cutting this program by $880 billion, which would be devastating. And looking at the Medicaid recipients in Rhode Island, it's interesting. 1 in 5 adults aged 19 to 64 are covered. 1 in 3 children are covered. And we all know how critical it is for health care for children, because a childhood problem left untreated can lead often to much more serious health consequences as they grow older, much more dependency on social programs, which are paid for by us. Good health care as a child guarantees, in many, many, and most cases, success in school, success in life, and a healthy life. 1 in 3 children. Now, 5 in 8 people residing in nursing homes are receiving Medicaid. So let me tell you what's going to happen when Medicaid is cut by this extraordinary amount of money, $880 billion. A lot of nursing homes will close because their margin, the difference between opening the doors and closing them is the Medicaid money they receive. When that goes, where are you going to put your ailing mother or grandmother? I'll tell you what to do. You're going to do it like they did it before Medicaid. When I was a young kid, it was not unusual to go visit someone, and in the front room, there'd be the hospital bed and the grandmother, and the mother was taking care of the person, and that was health care back then. But after Medicaid, we were able to create a much more effective health care system. And this will touch not just the very poor, this touches the working families. it's the only way they can keep really their mother or father or older relative or a child with a very serious illness in a safe, protective place where they can receive appropriate care. Now, 3 in 7 Medicaid recipients in Rhode Island are working-age adults with disability. Now, this is a situation where these people, because of their physical limitations, cannot work, need assistance. Some are severely disabled, others are significantly disabled. And they're going to be left literally out in the cold. And I must say there's a corollary here, because just a few days ago, the president announced that he was going to take the IDEA education program and move it into the Department of Health, which at the same time is trying to shed thousands and thousands of workers. So my fear, of course, is that, again, going back into my youth, the 50s and the 60s, that children with disabilities will be sitting in the back of the room by themselves, trying to keep themselves occupied, because what we have created through IDEA, a system of education tailored to the individual child's disability, will be unsupportable. And that's the kind of damage he's doing. And it's the working people, it's the families, it's the kids, and it's, I think, inexcusable. Throughout the country, 38 million children rely on Medicaid. 2.3 million children with disabilities, as I said, throughout the country rely on Medicaid. And also, as I said, throughout the country, not just Rhode Island, 7 million seniors count on Medicaid to afford nursing home care. So we're in a situation now where we are basically undercutting our healthcare system. And it's not just these people who feel it, everyone will feel it. If these Medicaid cuts go through, it will create so much turmoil in my state that our healthcare delivery system will be under great pressure, but I think so much pressure that it will not work. Where do people go when they don't have health care? They go to the emergency room. So if you or me or somebody we might even have health care insurance, and then we have a serious problem, well, we can go to the emergency room and just get in the back of the line that's going all the way around the block and through the parking lot and every place else, because these hundreds of thousands of people without health care, that's where they'll have to go when they're so painful they can't go to work. This is a disaster in the making. And again, we saw last week and weeks before President Trump talking about, I'm going to put tariffs in and we're going to fix the whole economy. Nonsense. It's a disaster. It's killing our markets. And once again, I'm going to go in there and take out Medicaid, et cetera, et cetera. It'll be a disaster. And I think we must avoid it. We are better off because of Medicaid. Better health care outcomes in this country. A different country, literally, than it was prior to the introduction of Medicaid, and a better country. It provides health care coverage for example, 17 million women of reproductive age, so they can have the health care they need. And it helps families grow and prosper. And by making seniors and people with disabilities get the care they need, we are, I think, living up to the aspirations of this country, which is to ensure that those who need care get care. You know, there's been a lot of men and women who've served in the armed forces of the United States, and I was proud to do it myself, and they weren't risking their lives so that a very wealthy individual could have 5 Mercedes rather than 4. They were risking it so kids could have health care who needed it, so their mother and father could have a place to be when they were sick and ill in their older years. And what we're doing, we're forgetting that sacrifice, and we're saying, no, we're just here to pay off the rich people who paid off so much through the president's campaign to get him elected. Now, one thing I want to emphasize, which is very important and often overlooked, going back to Rhode Island, 74% of adults in Rhode Island and Medicaid are working. There is this insidious notion that this is just a free giveaway to people who don't work, who don't deserve it, etc. That's why we can get rid of it. 74% of the people on Medicaid are working, and they're working very hard. Oh, and by the way, my guess is they're not going to get a big benefit from these tax cuts because they're minimum wage or a little bit more. So we are really doing something that is so unjust and I believe un-American, of rewarding the wealthy, some of whom have worked hard to get it, some of whom just were lucky enough to be born to the right parents, and we're giving them a fortune, and we're taking away basic health care from working men and women. So we are in a very, very difficult situation. I don't think we can touch Medicaid. And for the moral reasons I tried to suggest, and for the economic reasons. If those 74% of Medicaid adults who are working can't get to work because they're ill, how do we get the jobs done? We don't. And the impact on the nation in terms of these cuts are going to be horrendous. And this impact is going to be every place in the country. I talked a lot about Rhode Island, but one of the ideas the Republicans are advancing to cut Medicaid is to eliminate the Medicaid expansion provided for under the Affordable Care Act. Now, according to the Urban Institute and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, this cut would cost 41 states over $44 billion. States would have to increase their share of Medicaid spending by 25%. States like North Dakota, Indiana, Montana, and Nebraska would see their costs go up by 30%. So I hope my colleagues from these states are ready, willing, and able to go out and tell their constituents, your health care costs are going up 30%. Now, obviously, I oppose this resolution that is being proposed. We have to do more, not less. And it's not just about the moral commitment I feel we have to people who need health care coverage. It's about the economics of caring for people early before it becomes more expensive, providing facilities for people who need those facilities rather than let them languish at home. And Mr. President, with that, I would yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Nevada.
Madam President, Madam President, excuse me, Mr. President.
It's happened to me before, too. It's okay.
I apologize.
No
Mr.
worries.
President, I am joining my colleagues today because Nevada's health care and Americans' health care, it really is not up for negotiation. And on Wednesday, I want to recognize this. Senate Republicans released their budget plan to pay for President Trump's billionaire tax cuts. You've heard everybody talking about that. We've been on the floor. This is so important for the American public to understand what's at stake, because really, we can't let them fool you with some bureaucratic language or to make them seem less devastating than these impacts really are, or to use some sort of math gimmick. Because here are the facts, and let me just say, April 3rd, 2025, we just received from the Joint Committee on Taxation that shows that President Trump and his Republican followers in the Senate really want to add almost $7 trillion to our national debt. The Republican plan to extend the 27 Trump tax law will cost $5.5 trillion, including interest. And the budget resolution Senate Republicans introduced this week allocates an additional $1.5 trillion for tax breaks to be crafted by the Finance Committee Republicans and the Trump administration. This brings the total cost for over 10 years of the Republican tax plan to about $7 trillion. $7 trillion in deficit and debt. And they are doing this to give tax cuts to billionaires. And in order to pay for it, one of the things, and you're hearing us talk about this, is they want to slash Medicaid in this country by almost $1 trillion. You've heard this term, $880 billion, because that's what the House has sent to their committee to say we need to find some way to pay for these $7 trillion that in tax cuts that we want to give to billionaires. Now, Nevadans and so many across the country are being told these cuts are going to come from cracking down on waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. Well, that would be great if it were true. Let me just put a fine print on this. I'm all for getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse within government programs. And I know that many states, and actually all states, including the Attorney General's office in the state of Nevada, they actually have a Medicaid fraud unit that goes after that fraud, waste that we see across the country. Every state has one. But here's the simple truth. We are not going to find $880 billion in pay-fors by only cutting waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. To shrink this essential program down by nearly $1 trillion, President Trump and his Republican allies in Congress, they actually have to gut Medicaid. There's no other way around it. That's what they have to do, and that's not just a talking point from the Democrats. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, their analysis confirmed that Republicans would have to make the largest cuts in Medicaid history to meet their budget's $880 billion target. Now, here's what I know, and you're hearing from all of our colleagues that tonight, and you will hear this as we go into the votes that the Republicans want to take on this. I don't care whether you're from a red state, blue state, you live in an urban area, rural area, Medicaid cuts to pay for billionaire tax cuts would hit everyone hard. It would be devastating. And nearly 800,000 people in Nevada would be devastated by this because they depend on Medicaid to keep themselves and their families healthy. This includes 1 in 6 adults, 3 in 8 children, 4 in 7 nursing home residents, and 1/3 of people with disabilities. I also know that 66% of adults in Nevada who benefit from Medicaid, they work for a living. And 43% of our births are covered by Medicaid. In Nevada, 17,600 Medicaid enrollees used home and community-based services and long-term services to support them. These are seniors, these are people with disabilities. And nearly 40% of all children in Nevada are covered by Medicaid and CHIP. And you heard my colleague from Rhode Island say this, and I also want to dispel this notion that people on Medicaid are somehow lazy and they don't want to work and they're just somehow milking the system. Let me be very clear, nearly half of all Nevada Medicaid enrollees, that's 380,000 people, are people with jobs and their dependents. Now, I want to put a fine point on this because I have to just call this out. This is just a crazy notion because I've met these families. I've met a woman, she and her husband are working, they're both working full time. Their daughter has a rare disease. Without Medicaid, they would not be able to afford the medication and the healthcare, access to healthcare that she needs. I have visited in my state clinics, FQHCs, clinics, federally qualified healthcare centers in the north and the south. I was in the northern Nevada one just 3 weeks ago. And I was looking at the individuals that were coming in for care, and I asked them, how would you be impacted by Medicaid? Not only would it devastate this health center, I said, who are these people that are coming to you? You know who they are? They're people that are working at Amazon. They're people that are working at Amazon and Walmart that have to get Medicaid because the billionaire owners of these organizations don't care enough to provide them health care. This is outrageous, but these are the people that we are talking about. And let me just say, last month I met with a group of obstetricians from northern Nevada. Medicaid is the largest payer for maternity services in my state. In 2023, there were 13,206 babies and their mothers who had access to essential health care. Nevada Medicaid does postpartum coverage up to 12 months thanks to the American Rescue Plan. And now the Republicans and Donald Trump want to take it all away. I know I am not the only state that is dealing with this, and I will tell you, and it's some of my colleagues I know, and I've talked to them, whether you're Republican or Democrat, we have talked about this. It's devastating for our urban areas. It would devastate my rural communities and every rural community across this country. If you live in a rural community in my state, you have very little access to health care. So you want to keep those clinics open. Because if you don't, then you're driving 4 hours just to get your health care somewhere, if you have the ability to get there and drive there. And so I know it's not unique, and my hope is that my colleagues and my Republican colleagues who care like I do, and I know they do, about their constituents, we are going to address this issue and we're going to work together so we can protect Medicaid. But, Mr. President, I would like the opportunity to engage in a colloquy with one of my colleagues who is here today from Michigan.
Without objection.
Thank you. Because the senator from Michigan, Senator Slotkin, I know, like my state, they call it a swing state. It's a swing state. We have voters that we represent that are Republicans, Democrats, independents, and it really isn't about your party. It is about health care and access to health care in this country. And so for my colleague from Michigan, I am curious what she is seeing and the impact that the Medicaid cuts that we are talking about would have to your constituents, the people that you represent in Michigan.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Mr. President. I mean, I think what we're all here talking about into the dead of night is this idea of who we want to be as a nation when it comes to providing health care. Do we believe that the greatest country in the world should be able to treat the people who need help in our country, or are we okay with the poorest among us, the weakest among us, those who are disabled, those who are elderly, those who are children, just not having access to care? And as you said, when you look around at the math, right? This isn't a political statement. The math of needing to find $880 billion with a B, the math just doesn't work without gutting Medicaid. And I think it's important to understand, at least in my state, that this isn't just about people who have Medicaid as their primary insurance, right? We have 10 million people in Michigan, 2.6 million people are on Medicaid. The vast majority are children, right? People who can't live up to work requirements, people who just happen to be, young people who happen to be born where they were born. 37% of all our births in Michigan are handled and covered by Medicaid, and 2 out of every 3 nursing home elderly are covered by Medicaid. So it's not just about the people who are receiving direct care, it's about what Medicaid reimburses and funds. The idea that 65% of our nursing homes could potentially go under if they don't get this funding. The idea that our rural hospitals, from Hillsdale to Marquette, Michigan, have come to see me and they say, look, we're not Democrats, we are conservative people, but if you take away this reimbursement, we will collapse. They're already suffering after COVID. They're barely hanging on. So access to rural hospitals is something we're deeply, deeply worried about. I think the bigger question is, who do we believe we are, and do we have a commitment to serve and protect and provide basic health care to people in our states? Now, you mentioned this, but I think it's important to realize that with a number that big, we're not just talking about Medicaid. There's real risk of Medicare Part D being touched, the prescription drug piece of that, and the Affordable Care Act, which so many people depend on, the many, many people being cut off from that at the end of the year. The math just doesn't work. And so what we're really talking about is, in the state of Michigan, in the United States, the potential for either people to lose their coverage or to have the price of their coverage go up. Because everyone talking about these Medicaid cuts back home has also mentioned that, by the way, if we don't get the Medicaid reimbursement at our hospital, I'm just going to charge more to the people who have insurance. There's going to be more people in my ER. I'm going to have to pass that expensive price off to customers who do have health insurance. So it's just important to understand the full spectrum of what we're talking about here. Now, I'm sure you've heard a ton of personal stories, right? It's important to understand we're giving a talk on the Senate floor, we're talking about numbers, but at the end of the day, this is human beings. And I'm sure your phones are flooded, as mine are, with people who want to tell their personal stories. And I will say, for me, it feels like Groundhog's Day, because I decided to run in 2018 for the very issue of health care, because I happened to live through my mother getting stage 4 ovarian cancer without having insurance. She had no insurance. And that first month of that terminal diagnosis, where you're desperate to get her tests and coverage and some kind of emergency surgery, you're using your credit cards, you're doing whatever you can while you're just feeling completely lost that you know your mother is going to die. That feeling is the worst feeling I've ever experienced, and it's what we're proposing to millions of additional Americans by the end of this year. So I'm sure you've heard a lot of personal stories on your phones. I don't know if you want to walk through a couple of those stories, but I think it's important to make it a human issue, not just a numbers issue.
And that's right. And I thank my colleague from Michigan, because it's true. I mean, I can tell you, in February, I spoke with Madison from Nevada. She has stiff person syndrome. This is a disease that impacts all her muscles and her breathing, and she has to be on a ventilator 7 times. She wouldn't be here today without Medicaid, which provides her with home health care. And Madison's sister, Tricia, was with her that day when she had to deal with such, and this is trauma. This is such, health care is trauma in somebody's life. If Madison's Medicaid coverage ends, she would have to go live with her sister and depend on her for care. She'd be forced to move away from her community and her whole life. Madison needs really Medicaid to live her life to the fullest. And like my colleague says from Michigan, these are real people that will be impacted. And I know she's seeing the same. I do want to pose to her this thought, though, of it's not just the individuals. We know there's real life impact, and we see it. We hear it in our offices. We are getting those calls. We're meeting with individuals. We know them. We know them. They're our neighbors. They're our friends. We know them when we're home. Here's the other thing people forget, though. I know in Nevada, We already don't have enough providers in Medicaid. We don't have enough providers in the program to begin with. And expanding the number of healthcare providers in Nevada, it really has been a priority of mine, and that's why I am leading legislation, bipartisan legislation, with my colleague, Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, to support graduate medical education programs. But here's the deal. If Medicaid funding in Nevada is cut, not only will those rural health clinics close that I talked about, but here's the thing people forget. We would have fewer providers because they would be incentivized they would not be incentivized to come to my state and treat patients. They're going to figure out where they can go and still survive. Remember, our providers have to still survive and make a living, and they want to treat patients. And so we are going to have a provider issue in my state. And I don't know if that is an issue for Michigan, but it is something that goes hand in hand with these Medicaid cuts, because I hear from my providers as well.
We talked about rural hospitals. I think, again, even if you're not on Medicaid, you've never signed up, you've never been at a low point in your life where you've needed a bridge, you've never had a child with a disability, you've just never touched the system, I guarantee you the hospitals that you depend on, the clinics that you depend on, the nursing homes that you depend on for your mom, your dad, are dependent on Medicaid. I guarantee it. And what we're hearing from our rural hospitals is, look, we're the only hospital in 3 hours where you can get care. If we go, where do our people go? Where do we tell them to go? If you're delivering a baby and you have to come off the Upper Peninsula into the Lower Peninsula of Michigan, there is just no way that we can function that way. So it's not just about as you say, individuals, although those stories are striking, it is about access to care for everybody. I was talking to a doctor from the Lansing Carefree Medical Clinic. It's completely Medicaid covered. It is the folks who are left out of the system, he will just close. I mean, we'll have clinics just close. So I think we're talking about something that, again, comes to the heart of like who we are as a community. I will also just say, I think it's important to put a warning label on it, and then I'll turn it to you to maybe finish out, is there's a lot of magic math going on right now on the other side of the aisle, right? How do you take a group of people who both want to cut Medicaid in a devastating way, want to cut other health care in a devastating way, and match them up with a bunch of people who say, I can't, colleagues on the other side of the aisle who said, I can't accept cuts like that? How do you balance two completely different factions in the same party? And it happens, right? What normally we would see is tough choices being made, right? Either the other side of the aisle is going to acknowledge we have to make these devastating cuts, or they're not going to cut them. But what we see now is the third secret option, which is magic math, which is we're going to tell you we're not cutting anything, but we're going to quietly make the math just work so that we are actually cutting all these things. We are able to reap the benefits, or we push those cuts out to the out years, right? So you don't notice them today, but maybe later, maybe after other elections, you're going to feel those Medicaid cuts. So it's just my big warning label on the whole story here is that there's magic math going on from beginning to end on this package, and don't be fooled. They are coming for your health care. You are either going to be paying more or you're going to lose your coverage. That's just a fact based on the math that they've put out publicly and voted on today. So I thank my colleague for the opportunity to do my first colloquy. I didn't know this was a thing that we could do. Thank you for giving me that opportunity, and I'll let you finish us out.
Thank you, from great senator from Michigan. Let me say I'm so pleased that she brought this up, because it is a gimmick. The gimmick that they're playing right now is somehow that these $7 trillion in tax cuts that they want to give to billionaires is not going to add to our deficit or debt. Remember, these are the Republicans, the party of fiscal responsibility. And it's not going to add to our deficit or debt. This is a perfect example. I read this in the papers. Perfect example of what this means. This is like you're a parent and you have put your daughter through college for 4 years. And she comes home and she says, oh, well, it's not going to, you're already paying for it, so it's not really an additional cost to you. So I'm just going to stay home and not work, and you just continue to pay the same amount that you were paying for college, and I'll just live off of that. It was a great example one of our papers put out, as a journalist put out, because that is exactly what the Republicans are trying to do here. This is it. And remember, they are next going to come and try to lift the debt ceiling, more debt to pay for this. This is the party fiscal responsibility. At a time, think about this, at a time when our economy is already in a free fall because of these crazy tariffs. And by the way, if you care about your retirement and your 401k, you're watching that stock market because that's in free fall. That's what this administration, that's what these Republicans are bringing you. But remember, when they started, they got handed an economy from the previous administration that was going strong, that had just come out of a pandemic, was trying to turn everything around. Was it perfect? No. But we were working on addressing the challenges facing this country. I know my colleague from Michigan knows this. Our families' prices are too high. Costs are high. We got to focus on them. We got to lower those costs. These tax cuts should be about them. More money in their pocket. We started doing that around health care, capping the cost of insulin, making sure that those big pharma companies, they would negotiate with us and we can keep those prescription drugs down. We started that process. We have more to do. I know that. But when President Trump came into office, the first thing he said, he was going to lower those costs for our families. That is not his priority, and that's not what he's doing. And that's why we have to shine a light on this. And that's why I'm so proud of my colleagues for standing up and making sure the American public knows that they're coming after your health care, and they're coming after your retirement, and they're coming after you so that they can pay for these tax cuts for billionaires. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wisconsin.
Mr. President, I rise today for the third time this evening on behalf of Wisconsinites in rural communities whose access to health care will be devastated by cuts to Medicaid. Earlier this evening, I talked about the impact that cuts to Medicaid would have on children and babies, and then about the impact that cuts to Medicaid would have on seniors and older adults. But in my home state of Wisconsin, about a quarter of the population lives in rural areas, or roughly 1.4 million people do. And across the United States, about 60 million people live in rural areas. And when I travel around Wisconsin, I hear about several challenges that our rural communities face, from the lack of high-speed broadband to ensuring businesses have enough workers to thrive. But the number one challenge that I hear about time and again is about rural access to health care. Wisconsinites in rural communities face long drives and wait times to see a doctor. And for specialized health care, many of my constituents are looking at hours in the car just to get the care that they need and that they deserve. That's why I've made it my mission to lower health care costs and expand care across the state, but especially for critical access hospitals in our rural communities. I am proud of our work because I know what a lifeline our rural hospitals are for Wisconsinites, from emergency care to having a place to get regular checkups. But I know we have work to do. In the past 10 years, 120 rural hospitals have either closed or ceased offering inpatient services across this country. That's 120 communities and hundreds of thousands of people whose health care options have diminished or vanished overnight. Most recently in the state of Wisconsin, the closure of 2 HSHS hospitals and more than a dozen, well over a dozen clinics in western Wisconsin left 1,400 workers out of a job and thousands of Wisconsinites with less access to emergency care, inpatient beds, mental health care, treatment for opioid addiction, and labor and delivery services. Nearly half of all rural hospitals nationwide operate at a deficit, especially in states like Wisconsin that have not taken up the Affordable Care Act Medicaid expansion option for adults. In a struggle to keep their doors open, many rural hospitals opt to close less lucrative units, such as maternity wards. That means women driving further for prenatal checkups or to give birth. For the hospitals left and places that provide care, there's largely been one saving grace: Medicaid. Medicaid, and Medicaid expansion in particular, is a crucial funding source for cash-strapped rural hospitals. And it makes sense. Children and people in rural areas are more likely to be enrolled in Medicaid than those in suburban and urban areas. In 10 states and territories, more than half of Medicaid and CHIP enrollees live in rural areas, including 1 in 3 children in Wisconsin's rural communities. Medicaid ensures access to a critical range of services for people living in our rural areas, including covering nearly half of all births. And like other states, our rural hospitals are already too few and far between. Closing any more down would be devastating for people's health and our economy. But those are the consequences we face if Donald Trump and Republicans cut Medicaid to pay for their billionaire tax cuts. It's not just blue states. It's not just big cities that should be bracing for impact if Republicans get their wish. Massive cuts to Medicaid will undoubtedly force more rural hospitals to shutter. That means more Americans suffering from a stroke or heart attack, not getting the life-saving care they need until it may be too late. That means more children in rural communities not getting to regular checkups, and it means more expectant mothers facing roadblocks to getting prenatal care. Let's be clear. The health and lives of rural Americans are on the chopping block if Republicans and Donald Trump pass their plan to gut Medicaid and all to make the super wealthy Americans even richer. It's wrong, and I, for one, plan to fight back. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I rise in strong opposition to our colleagues' budget, the Republican budget, the Trump budget, a plan where billionaires win and families lose. We are voting on this budget resolution because our colleagues are once again telling us whose problems they are focused on solving. Spoiler alert, it is not the problems of everyday Americans. 2/3 of these tax cuts go to billionaires. After an election where the American people sent a clear message that they were concerned about the high price of essentials like health care, my Republican colleagues are focused on another round of tax cuts for billionaires. This proposal gives the top 0.1% of income earners a new tax break worth an average of $180,000. It gives a $50 million tax break to Elon Musk over the next 10 years. That's right, 10 years, $50 million. I bet a lot of Americans would like that, but it's going to Elon Musk. And it pays for it by threatening the health care of 80 million Americans, including 31 million children. This is not what the Americans signed up for when they voted. I have heard this from constituents. I know because some of the people who, a number of them, a lot of them, voted for Donald Trump and me. What did they want? They wanted us to work on costs. They wanted us to bring down the costs of groceries and bring down the costs of health care, bring down the costs of everything from housing to child care. They wanted us to stand up for them. Instead, we get this billionaire tax scam bill. So let's talk about Medicaid. It's not maybe the first word on everyone's minds when they wake up in the morning, because they actually, sometimes people don't know that Medicaid is helping their parents and their grandparents pay for their assisted living. In my case, I knew that my dad, who was in assisted living that was paid for by his savings, he had late onset Alzheimer's, and I knew the exact day when that savings would run out. He got married 3 times, that's for another story, but he had limited savings, and the savings would get him through a certain date, and then Medicaid would kick in. That was the date where he was gonna actually have to move, and I found another place for him. He actually died a year before that happened. We miss him every single day. But I knew that Medicaid was there for him when those savings ran out, that he had a place to go. It might not have been the place that he had been at for a few years, but it was a place that was safe for him. Medicaid provides health care for 20%, 1 in 5 of the people in rural Minnesota. And it provides the long-term care for 1 out of 2, 50% of the people in my state who are in long-term care. It's pretty important. I spent, about 2 weeks ago, I went on a 14-county tour in rural Minnesota. I went to a number of senior facilities and assisted livings and heard their stories. So many of them needed Medicaid. But this partisan budget, it would force rural hospitals to shut their doors, and it would be particularly dangerous for people with chronic conditions and families caring for a child with a rare disease. All to pay for more than $2 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthiest people in our country. Slashing Medicare and Medicaid would devastate families across our country. These are programs that millions of people rely on, like our neighbors, like our parents, like our grandparents. This is real, and I think people know that. They understand that. I think about a constituent from Inver Grove Heights, Minnesota, who told me that Medicaid helps her to afford the cost of her father's Medicare and memory care. She said, "I'm not sure what we would do if we could not receive this benefit." And I think about what I heard from another constituent, a working mom of 2, whose parents rely on Medicaid for health care. She told me she doesn't think that it's fair to shift the cost of care to families like hers to pay for tax cuts to wealthy. You know, that's the incredible thing about democracy. People write in, they send emails, they call our offices, they show up at town hall meetings, and they tell us what they think. In this email, she said, we need to draw the line and say, this is enough. I couldn't agree more. Today, the day has been a really hard time. I was on a TV program earlier, and there were a lot of major Wall Street traders and Jim Cramer, who are experts on Wall Street, and they talked about what a devastating day this has been. This was actually the toughest day, the biggest tumble the stock market has taken since 2020 in the pandemic. But this was not a pandemic. This was not a global pandemic. This was a self-inflicted wound from the President of the United States. And it sadly affected people, not just on Wall Street, but on Main Street. We call this the Trump tariff tax, TTT. Easy to remember, Trump tariff tax. Estimates are now based on the announcement made yesterday that this is a $4,000 tax per average American family. It is a $20,000 additional fee on every single home that someone wants to buy. That's the average. Thousands of dollars for a car. Why? Because our supply chains are forever integrated with the rest of the world. We get stuff from Canada. And we were able to see 4 of our colleagues stand up and vote with all Democrats to say the basis for the Trump tariff tax on Americans based on Canada was wrong. And we actually made a statement last night, and then what happens? We see the effects of the Trump tariff tax. 4% down stock market. Some of it's 5% down. The Republican budget doubles down on this because while we are seeing this assault on American savings and on average American families who work hard every single day, we're also now hearing about a budget that would add in 30 years $37 trillion to the debt. $37 trillion to the debt. While cutting Medicaid, why do I say that? Because in order to meet the targets that were outlined over in the House, the Congressional Budget Office that has long been nonpartisan, used by Democrats and Republicans in Congress, have made it clear that this would have to involve cuts to Medicaid. You add that to the firings at the Department of Health and Human Services that will undercut health services and research. I just met with a man this weekend from a small town right close to Brainerd, Minnesota, whose wife had just died in January. In order to figure out the death benefit, what he got under Social Security, he first emailed. He's very much with it at age 79. Took too long, on and on. He called hours and hours and hours. He went into the office, he drove 30 miles. He was asked to show his ID online. It went on and on and on for days until he called our office and we got involved and tried to help him. A man who's grieving, who just lost his wife. That is what these cuts are going to mean for regular people. And yes, it's a disaster for Wall Street, but it is more of a disaster on Main Street. For decades, and here's one example, big pharma companies had a sweetheart deal written into law that allowed them to charge seniors whatever they wanted for life-saving prescription drugs. Along with many of my Democratic colleagues, I led the bill to have finally Medicare negotiations under Medicare Part D. What happened? The last administration took this on, top 10 drugs, everything from Eliquis to Januvia to Xarelto to Jardiance. They finally negotiated the prices and negotiated prices for those 10 drugs, which went down 60%, 70%, will save 9 million seniors, $1.5 billion in out-of-pocket costs in just the first year alone. No one has refuted these stats because this was the negotiation. Now this torch this incredible effort to finally bring down pharmaceutical prices has been passed on to this administration. They have been given 15 drugs, that's the next allotment, including Ozempic, to negotiate the prices down for seniors. They also have to do the year after that, and the year after that. And there is no sign, based on testimony in the Health Committee, based on what we've seen out there, that they're going to have the wherewithal to do this. I hope they do, but there is no sign that they're going to do this. I see that Senator Welch just entered the chamber. He was the lead author on this bill in the House of Representatives and understands exactly what I'm talking about. That is an example when you look at the Medicaid and the use for, yes, children with disabilities, kids throughout our land, but also our seniors for nursing homes and assisted living. And then you look at the Medicare and how important that is, and then you look at the progress we've made on things like prescription drugs. All of these are on the line. At the same time, Americans have seen the biggest drop to their savings, the biggest drop to the stock market, a self-inflicted wound, a reckless act based on things that Donald Trump had said to his, I don't know, the people he hangs out with, his friends. Well, the people that voted for him in my state did not sign up for this. Instead of building on our progress, Republicans are driving up costs. By not standing up on these tariffs, although 4 of them did, on Canada, by not standing up when it comes to this assault on programs for our seniors like Medicaid. This is unacceptable, and we should not be here advancing policies that are going to force more Americans to have to choose between filling their prescriptions and putting food on their table. Too many Americans struggle with the cost of health care. Instead of looking out for billionaires, let's look out for them. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Vermont.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here with my colleagues, Senator Klobuchar and Senator Warnock. And, you know, it's not an incredibly important issue for all of America. It's not a red state, blue state situation. It's about something that's near and dear to the heart of the presiding officer, the doctor from Kansas, and that's health care. Health care is in jeopardy, particularly Medicaid. Medicaid is health care. It's health care for kids. It's health care for many low-income seniors. It's health care for 80 to 90 million Americans. It is health care for folks who must live in nursing homes. They're at that stage in life where what keeps them alive, what allows their kids to visit, are Medicaid paid for nursing homes. In fact, in Vermont, 2 out of 3 of our seniors who are in nursing homes are there only because of Medicaid. So this is important to families, to kids, to seniors. It's part of our healthcare system. And what is of concern, I think, to all of us, and I really want to emphasize, I think it's all of us, not the Democrats versus the Republicans, is wanting to have a healthcare system that's going to be there when people need it, that people are not denied access to health care because they're poor kids. They're not denied access to nursing home care because they've run out of their life savings. We want to make certain that the health care needs of our children and our seniors, disabled children, disabled adults,
We want to make sure those health care needs are met. We have to do that. It's the mark of a functioning and caring society. And there's not anybody on either side of the aisle that doesn't want to do the best we can, not just for our kids, but for the kids that live in our community. That want to do the best we can, not just for our parents, but for all the parents that live in a community. That want to do the best for all folks who are disabled and need the special requirements that go along with life with a significant disability. But here's where there is a difference. The tax bill that's being proposed that will lower taxes is going to be paid for in significant part by drastic cuts to the Medicaid budget, maybe up to $800 billion. And in fact, in the House version of the reconciliation bill, the Energy and Commerce Committee, on which I served when I was in the House and has jurisdiction over Medicaid, was instructed in that resolution to come up with about $800 billion in savings. And what is the purpose of those savings? It's not to lower the national debt. It's not to invest in research and development. It's not to provide universal, affordable child care or family and medical needs, things that I think all of us absolutely need. It's to fund a tax cut. Literally, it's to fund a tax cut. So then the question becomes, tax cut for whom? We have millions of taxpayers in this country with all different incomes. And that includes everyone from folks who are making $7 or $8 an hour to $15 an hour, to middle-class families, maybe with two folks working, firefighter maybe, and a teacher that might be making $150,000. They have a couple of kids, still trying to really struggle at the end of each month to pay the bills, put aside a little money for college, put a little money aside hopefully for a 2-week vacation at some point during the day. Or that tax cut can be designed so it goes to folks who've really been riding the wave of the financialization of the economy, folks who have become billionaires. God bless them. Multinational corporations that have extremely strong balance sheets and really strong profits. Companies that already saw a tax cut in the last tax bill that exceeded what they even asked for. So the question that is really before this Congress has to be put in very concrete terms. It's not, are you for a tax cut? It's not, are you for Medicaid? Because probably every single one of us on both sides of the aisle would say yes to a tax cut, and we'd say yes to Medicaid. But we've got to be candid with one another and with the American people. That the tax cut that the majority is proposing, more than half of it is going to go to billionaires and multimillionaires and to very, very profitable multinational corporations. And in the design of the, quote, pay for, $800 billion is going to be taken away from the health care that provides essential health care to kids and to seniors and to disabled people. So this is not really a question of are you for a tax cut? We all are. And it's not really a question if you're for Medicaid. We all are. It's a question of the specific bill that's being proposed, which is a tax cut that is designed to lower taxes for very wealthy people who won't notice one way or the other at all, whether they do or don't get yet another tax cut. They won't know it. It won't affect them. It won't in any way have an impact on how they live their life day to day. It won't have any impact on their ability to put money aside for the kids to go to college. It won't have any impact on their ability to put money in a trust fund so their children and their grandchildren can live with total economic security. It will have no impact on that. And it will certainly have no impact on the improvement of our economy, because that money will be spent or saved rather than invested in the child care that working families need. It won't be invested in the family leave that a parent needs when a spouse or a child becomes sick. It'll have absolutely no impact on that. So the question for us is, why would we design a bill that is going to give a tax cut to folks that don't need it, in some cases haven't even asked for it? It's not going to be reinvested in the economy to improve the well-being of our society through education or child care or family leave. But then we have the pretense that we'll be fiscally responsible and, quote, pay for the tax cut. But the way we're going to pay for the tax cut is taking away health care from people who desperately need it and can't afford it. That's what's up here. That's the question. It's not rhetoric. It's not about political principles. This is about day in and day out survival for many American families who have absolutely no capacity financially to take care of a parent who's now in a nursing home, or parents of a disabled child whose only lifeline to being able to care for that child is Medicaid. And folks with a disabled child, as we know, it's an incredible challenge for them, and they meet it. It's amazing that a person, a family, they have the bad luck of having a disabled child, but they have the good heart that they can love that child as though it is the best child in the whole wide world. That's how they are. That's how Americans are. They accept what God gives them, and they love that child. But it makes a difference whether they can live their life if they have Medicaid that helps get that wheelchair, that may help them with a van so they can go out as a family. That's literally what we're talking about. This is real. This is consequential. This is not about polls and who's ahead and who's up and who's down. This is about a society through the United States Senate at this moment that is making a decision that we're going to give tax cuts to people who don't need them, haven't asked for them, but whose political supporters here are demanding them on their behalf, and give tax cuts to corporations that have had record profits at the expense of taking away the health care that families in your community and mine totally depend on. This is wrong. This is wrong. You know, the most elemental thing that a family needs is some security that if they have a child or they have an elder parent, they're not going to leave them out in the street, kick them aside. And that's what is being proposed in this bill. That is what's being proposed. So, Mr. President, I hope we come to our senses here. And we just start with the proposition that whatever it is we do, whatever tax policy we believe is in the best interest of the American people, we start with the commitment that however we implement that policy, it will do no harm to the children in your community and mine, to the folks in nursing homes in your community and mine. We will do no harm. And that, Mr. President, is why it's so essential that we defeat this proposal. And I yield back the balance.
Mr. President.
The senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, I rise tonight in strong opposition to this awful and frankly immoral budget. Recently, I was appointed to the Finance Committee of the United States Senate. And the reason why I wanted to serve on that committee is because I wanted to get a chance to shape the nation's budget. As I thought about all of the things that I have fought for long before I came to the Senate, access to health care, access to learning and early education for all of our children, ensuring that people could retire with dignity. As I thought about the things that I cared about, I wanted to serve in a place where I might have an impact on a nation's budget. And that is because for me, a budget is not just a fiscal document, it's a moral document. It's not just numbers and figures. It's not just dollars and cents. Show me your budget and I'll show you who you think counts and who doesn't. Show me your budget and I'll show you what you think matters and what doesn't. Show me your budget and I'll show you your priorities. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And I have to say that if this budget that is being proposed were an EKG, it would suggest that the United States Congress has a heart problem and is in need of moral surgery. Why else would you propose, among other things, to cut up to $880 billion from Medicaid? I could talk about many aspects of this budget tonight, but I'll just stick with Medicaid. The programs that provide health care to the most vulnerable citizens, to children, to the severely disabled, to seniors in nursing homes. In fact, 71% of all Medicaid enrollees in Georgia are children. 71%. And I think it's important to underscore that because sometimes when we use these terms, Medicaid, there may be folks at home wondering, well, who are we talking about? Who are these people? Well, 71% of them are your children. And so this budget is dangerous. It is cynical. It is wrong-headed. I believe in addressing waste and fraud and abuse, and I would sign up quickly to deal with that in our government. But there isn't enough waste, fraud, and abuse to cut $880 billion out of Medicaid. And that's not just me saying that. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office said that the proposed GOP budget would require cuts to the Medicaid people rely on. And so don't be fooled. Don't be tricked by the funny math, by the games to cover up what's really happening here. And if I were them, I'd be ashamed of it and trying to hide it too. But they can't hide from the fact that they are about to take health care away from children. It's really that simple. And so why? Why are we cutting access to health care? A human right to 1.3 million children in Georgia, 250,000 Georgia seniors, over 37 million kids nationwide, 9.3 million seniors nationwide. Why should they go to bed tonight wondering if the Congress is getting ready to pull the rug out from under them? Well, the answer is sadly very simple. To pay for tax cuts to the richest of the rich, all the while adding $5 trillion to the nation's debt. Think about that. A plan that would cut health care to our most vulnerable citizens, including children living in the dawn of life and elders living in the twilight of life, while adding $5 trillion to the nation's debt, $37 trillion potentially over 30 years. And so we are taking health care for children and then burdening them with the consequences of this terrible decision. And so I rise tonight just to say that America is better than this. This is not who we are at our core. And the data demonstrates that the people at home, ordinary folks, don't want this. This is symptomatic of the ways in which the people's voices have been squeezed out of their democracy, and the folks who are sent here to represent them are representing other interests. And that's why every Sunday I return to my pulpit at Ebenezer Baptist Church. I'm blessed to stand there. I'm the preacher, but it's good to be in that atmosphere. It reminds me what ordinary people look like and their concerns and their needs. And sometimes when I stand in that pulpit, I'm reminded that Martin Luther King Jr., who was co-pastor, said that of all the injustices, inequality in health care is the most shocking and the most inhumane. It's the honor of my life still to stand there and preach every Sunday. The gospel tells us about a man who healed the sick, even those with pre-existing conditions, and never billed them for his services. And that's why I'm a Matthew 25 Christian. My work is informed by the words of that gospel, for I was hungry and you gave me food, I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink, I was a stranger and you welcomed me, I was naked and you gave me clothing, I was sick and you took care of me, I was in prison and you visited me. And some asked the master, when were you hungry? Lord, when were you thirsty? When were you a stranger? When were you sick? And the answer came, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it also unto me. This is not, for me, simply a policy argument. It is a moral discussion. It is about who we are fundamentally. What is the character of our nation? To center the 41% of Georgia children who rely on Medicaid, I think that's what keeping the faith looks like. To center the exhausted mom who is working multiple unpredictable jobs but still needs Medicaid to get the health care she needs. Many of the folks who need Medicaid go to work every day. In Georgia, the 600,000 folks who are in the Medicaid gap, for all of this talk about work requirements, the overwhelming majority of those folks go to work every day, or they're in school, or they're taking care of a disabled person. Keeping the faith means centering the Georgia seniors who rely on Medicaid to cover the cost of living in a nursing home. That's why in 2017, years before I knew I would even run for political office, let alone serve in the Senate, I came to this building, but I came as a faith leader. I came with other faith leaders across various religious traditions and people who claim no particular faith tradition but are people of moral courage, and we gathered in the rotunda. They were discussing back then another reconciliation bill. And once again, that bill would cut the social safety net programs like Medicaid and food assistance. And so we came here to bear witness to who we are at our best as a nation. And as we gathered in the rotunda, the Capitol Police gathered, and we were singing, and we were praying, and they said, "Sorry, but you can't sing and you can't pray in the rotunda." I thought to myself, somebody needed to pray. And they said, "Respectfully, we'll give you 3 warnings, and if you don't move, we'll have to arrest you." What they didn't understand was that I had already been arrested. My mind and my imagination had been arrested by the words of Dr. King, who taught us that the true measure of a person is not where he or she stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but in moments of challenge and controversy. We are tied in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality, and whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. My mind had already been arrested. My moral imagination had been arrested. And so that felt like a small price to pay. And so I call on the people who are at home to call your senator, call your congressperson, tell them that this is not right, it's not fair, it's not true to our highest values. There's some 2,000 verses in Scripture that tell us how to treat people who are in need, how to treat the poor. And maybe that's why faith leaders all across the state of Georgia have been reaching out to me in advance of this debate. Atlanta Bishop Jack Lumenog from the Anglican Diocese of St. Ignatius Loyola reached out to me earlier this month, and here are just a few excerpts from the letter he sent to me. He said, "I am grateful to be one of your constituents in Georgia and to write to a fellow pastor whose voice carries both moral authority and legislative power in this defining moment for our nation. However, I write to you today with a heavy heart, deeply troubled by the state of our nation. As a faith leader, I am increasingly concerned for the most vulnerable among us, those who rely on Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. These vital programs appear to be next in line for cuts by DOGE that could threaten the well-being of millions. Scripture," he says, "reminds us that whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. It is our moral duty to advocate for the dignity and security of those who depend on these essential safety nets. We cannot allow them to be dismissed amid political and economic maneuvering by unelected bureaucrats like Elon Musk, who have placated the legislature and judiciary while wielding outsized influence over public policy, all while bypassing democratic accountability. Please be assured of my prayers for you and your leadership during this critical moment in our nation's history. May you find strength in your faith and courage in your convictions as you continue to fight for justice and righteousness." Thank you, Bishop Lumenog. You are not alone. In your witness earlier in the year, the 3 largest Catholic organizations in the country, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the Catholic Health Association, and Catholic Charities USA, urged lawmakers to protect and strengthen Medicaid as a matter of faith. They wrote, "The Catholic Church teaches that human life is sacred and all people have inherent dignity and worth. As Catholic bishops and organizations that provide health care and social services on behalf of the church, we firmly believe that all people have the right to those necessities needed to live, found a family, and flourish. As you address reconciliation priorities, we urge you to prioritize those most in need and working families and protect the Medicaid program. We're hearing from a range of faith leaders because they understand that the acid test of someone's faith is a depth of their commitment to the most marginalized members of the human family. Nearly 2 million people in Georgia are enrolled in Medicaid. That's 1 in 5 Georgians. 1.3 million children in Georgia are enrolled in Medicaid. That's over 40% of every Georgia child, 2 in every 5 children. 250,000 Georgia seniors rely on Medicaid, including those living in nursing homes. That's around 1 in 7 Georgia seniors. And they are united in opposition to cuts to Medicaid. I hear their stories all the time. I want to just share a couple of them with you. Bristeria was excited to learn that she'd be expecting her first child, but her initial excitement quickly gave way to fear and anxiety as her pregnancy proved to be most difficult. During the pregnancy, doctors needed to perform an emergency operation, followed by an unexpected C-section delivery. And at the time of her pregnancy, Bristeria was working a part-time job that did not offer health benefits. Through family, friends, and coworkers, she discovered that she was eligible for Medicaid, which ultimately provided critical assistance in covering the cost for the care she needed through delivery. She was both relieved and grateful that a difficult pregnancy ended in the birth of a healthy baby boy. Now she's the proud mother of 2. She works full-time as a deputy county clerk. She is now enrolled in an employer-provided health plan, but she remains forever grateful that Medicaid was there for her when she needed it. It provided a temporary safety net amid a challenging pregnancy. And now her life is much better because of it. Naomi enrolled in Medicaid after she lost her job when pregnant with her son Noah. Noah was born prematurely at just 26 weeks and lives with chronic and medically complex conditions that require round-the-clock care. Noah's Medicaid coverage is provided through a combination of innovative programs, including Georgia's Right from the Start initiative for comprehensive health services and the Katie Beckett waiver program for children with complex medical needs. All over our country, there are children like Noah. His mom says, if we didn't have Medicaid, we would be in dire straits. Elizabeth from Ella-J, Georgia says, our lives depend on prescription medications and accessibilities. Please help us. Losing Medicaid would hurt disabled people or even potentially kill us without access to our medication. When it comes to politics or access to health care, disabled people are often left out and no one thinks of the consequences of taking away the things that help us. We live in forced poverty already and Medicaid is essential. Please think of us and be a voice for those who can't speak out. Finally, when Cindy was 17 years old, Cindy from Atlanta, she was a star athlete and a great student, preparing to go to college and enroll in ROTC. Her parents, who are refugees from Vietnam, moved to the United States to give her a better life, and she wanted to make them proud. But when she started feeling exhausted all the time and noticed swelling in her lymph nodes, she knew something was wrong. And after several visits to various doctors and the hospital, she was diagnosed with stage 2 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Obviously, that was devastating news for her and for her family. But they were at least grateful that Medicaid would cover all the treatment Cindy needed to survive. And just after Thanksgiving, her senior year in high school, Cindy started chemotherapy. Each session lasted 3.5 hours, and she had to do them every other week for 6 months. She went to classes as much as she could, took the SAT, and continued her plans to go to college. She went to her senior prom, even though it was just 2 days after her chemotherapy. But now Cindy is 30 years old. She's cancer-free. She's fascinated by all things aerospace, and she formed a group at her school to advocate for a new major in the field. She says, when I was 17, I was diagnosed with stage 2 non-Hodgkin lymphoma. But because of Medicaid, I was able to catch my cancer early, and today I'm cancer-free. I'm following my dreams of becoming an aerospace engineer, and I'm living proof that Medicaid saves lives. That's really the heart of it. Medicaid saves lives. And so I wanted to share these stories tonight because these are the stories of ordinary people. These are the stories of the folks who will not be able to stand on this Senate floor, but they need a voice. These are their stories, but in a real sense, these are our stories because, as Dr. King said, we are tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We got to know this very well over the last few years during the COVID-19 pandemic. A deadly airborne disease meant that if my neighbor was sick, I was potentially imperiled. That didn't make my neighbor my enemy. That simply means that I had an investment in my neighbor's health. My neighbor's health care was good for my health. And so that's the spirit with which we ought to be addressing something as sacred as crafting the nation's budget. I need other people's children to be okay for my children to be okay. I need people with disabilities to be okay for my children to be okay. I need seniors in nursing homes to be okay for all of us to be okay. I need children with cerebral palsy to be okay for my children to be okay. We need to look into each other's eyes and into the eyes of other people's children and see our own. So over the next few days, this body will be voting on a budget. And I submit that the budget says a whole lot about the body. It's a moral EKG. And the question is, are we well or do we have a heart condition? I submit that for all of our challenges, we suffer not from a poverty of resources, but a poverty of moral imagination. We are bigger, better, and stronger when our reach is wider and when we dare to build a nation that embraces all of our children. God give us strength, grace, and moral courage to get it right. I yield the floor.
I'd like to.
The senator from Colorado.
Thank you. I'd like, before he leaves the floor, I just wanted to thank my colleague from Georgia for the moral clarity of his remarks tonight. You know, it's interesting to think for a moment, Mr. President, what we're dealing with here, because we are living in and what the context of this budget is. We are living in the wealthiest country in the world, But unlike almost any other industrialized country in the world, we don't provide health care to everybody in the United States. This is the wealthiest country in the world. Per capita, we are far wealthier than any other country in the world, and yet we've made the decision not to provide health care to everybody. And shockingly, not only are we doing that, we're spending twice what any other industrialized country is spending on health care, for worse results. Do you know that today, Mr. President, in the United States of America, our life expectancy is 6 years shorter than if you live in an industrialized country in the world that has a universal health care system that costs half of what this health care system costs? If you're African American in the United States of America, your life expectancy is 12 years shorter than if you live in a country that has a universal health care system that costs half of the one in the United States of America. And those systems, by the way, are very different. Some of them are all public systems. Some of them are a combination of for-profit and nonprofit and government health care. But the thing they share in common is that everybody is covered and that they cost much less than the health care that's delivered in the United States of America. I'm sure my colleague from Georgia has the same experience I have in Colorado, which is to notice that every year it seems like health care actually becomes more scarce in America, less abundant, even though we're spending all that money. And don't even ask me about mental health care, which our families desperately need in the United States of America now. And as a former school superintendent, I can tell you our kids are facing a raging epidemic of mental health issues that are related to COVID, that are related to other challenges that are facing, that are related to the social media algorithms that are ripping their childhoods apart with absolutely no response from this place. So that's the starting point. And I think I heard my colleague from Georgia talking about how Martin Luther King had said that the inequality in health care is the most shocking and inhumane of all. And I wonder if one of the things he was thinking was that it's shocking and inhumane in the richest country of the world that not everybody is covered, even though in every one of these other industrialized countries, people are covered. And everybody in this room knows that no matter what whether you're covered or whether you're not, if you have a sick child, you're going to try to get them to a doctor. If you have a sick child, you're going to try to get them to the hospital, whether they're covered or whether they're not. And one of the reasons why our healthcare system is so expensive is that people don't have primary care. That is to say, they don't have the ability to go in to see a doctor in a timely way just to get a well checkup for themselves or for their kids, just to make sure that everything is okay so they don't develop a chronic health care condition that makes the health care much more expensive on the other end and shortens their life. That's why we have a 6-year life expectancy that's shorter than people in the rest of the industrialized world, unless you're African American in the United States, and it's 12 years, more than a decade. And that's why this budget is so astonishing and so amazing. And I agree with my colleague from Georgia that every budget is a moral document. This budget is an immoral document. This budget is an immoral budget. You would think that we lived in the poorest country in the world, not the richest country in the world. If you saw this budget, there is no way that any mayor in Georgia or any mayor in Colorado, whatever party they're in, a Democrat or Republican, who would put a budget like this in front of their people. There is no way they would come to them and say, we're going to make life even harder for people that are even hanging on by their fingernails just to get the health care they get. Because as my colleague from Georgia said, we're all sicker if kids don't get inoculated. We're all sicker if this country of ours doesn't have people that have primary care. It just gets more expensive. If families have to go to the emergency room to get care for their children because they have no other way to get health care. That's what's going to happen. Most of the people who are on Medicaid are children and senior citizens. That's who's on Medicaid, and disabled people. And people who have spent their entire lifetime, they've spent their entire lifetimes working, and now they have spent their life savings down just for the privilege of spending the rest of their days in a nursing home, often in rural parts of our country, on Medicaid. So this budget has these cuts to health care, is a way of saying it. I mean, we call it Medicaid, but it's health care for poor children, for poor seniors, for working people, for disabled people, for people that are living in nursing homes and have no other options. It's their health care. If you take this health care away, people are just going to get sicker. It's going to cost the society more. People are going to fill up these emergency rooms. And we know that because people will try to get health care wherever they can, even if it's the most expensive way of doing it. We would be a lot better off having a conversation about how to cover everybody in a way that costs us as little as it costs in other countries around the world. But not only are we not having that discussion with this budget, we're having a discussion about a budget that cuts taxes and blows this massive hole in the deficit, no matter how much the health care cuts are, of about $4.6 trillion. And that's to extend the tax cuts that Donald Trump came here and passed in 2017. This is another shocking part of this budget. You know, we have very significant problems in our economy. This country relied, when I was growing up, on the idea that if you worked hard, you could get ahead. If you worked hard and your kids worked hard, they could live a better life than the life that you live. That was the American promise. That was the American promise. And today, for the first time in American history, half the people that are 30 years old are going to make less money than their parents. Think about that. Half the people that are 30 years old in the country today are going to make less money than their parents did. If you look at young men in the United States of America, they are earning 40% less income today than they were in 1976. We tell ourselves that we're the land of opportunity. We need to be the land of opportunity, but we're seeing our economic mobility slide behind competition from Southeast Asia to Europe. There's a lot of discussion these days about what the threats to our democracy are, or the fact that our democracy is threatened. I don't think there is a greater threat to our democracy than the lack of economic mobility we have, than the fact that too many families in Colorado and across the state, across this country, feel like their kids are not going to live a life as good as the life they live. In Colorado, there's not a county anymore where people feel like their lives are going to be better than, where their kids' lives are going to be better than theirs. And when you lose that sense of opportunity, when you lose that sense that if you work hard, you're going to get ahead, that's a danger to a democracy, because inevitably somebody shows up, as President Trump did, and says, I alone can fix it. You don't need a democracy. You don't need the rule of law. You don't need this exercise in self-government. I can fix it. You should expect your private sector and your public sector to be hopelessly corrupt, hopelessly bankrupt. That is a dark vision, but that's the dark vision that he was elected on twice. And I think we'd be a lot better off trying to figure out how to create an economy that when it grows for everybody, not just the people at the very top. And an economy that when people worked hard, they felt like they knew they'd be able to propel their kids forward. It was an economy that reestablished the American dream for this entire country. We better do that. We better do that if we're going to have any hope of saving this democracy. But here comes a budget where the massive hole that's being blown into the deficit and is causing a proposal to cut health care for the poorest people in the country and the poorest children in the country. Here's what it's doing. It's cutting taxes for the wealthiest people in America. 50% of the benefit of this tax bill will go to the top 5% of Americans. $50% of the benefit of this tax bill will go to the top 5% of Americans. I've said it on the floor before, I'm not going to dwell on it again, but this is just as analogous. It's the same if a mayor in Denver or Grand Junction or Lyman or Durango or Springfield came to see the citizens of those communities and said, I'm going to borrow more money than we've ever borrowed before. And you ask them, well, what are you going to spend that on? I'm worried about that. What are you going to spend that money on? On parks? On public safety? On the mental health challenges that I described earlier? On our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our schools? And the answer was no, no, no. Well, what are you going to spend it on? We're going to give tax breaks to the 2 wealthiest neighborhoods in town and let it trickle down to everybody else. That is the Trump tax policy. That is the Trump tax policy in 2017, and it's the Trump tax policy this year. It's very unusual, by the way, to have a president who's been here twice with an interruption. But that's the case with President Trump. And we now know the facts of the math that he claimed the last time. And he said last time the tax cuts would pay for themselves. And we know that they cost the country $4 trillion. That the sons and daughters of teachers and firefighters and police officers all over this country who are not going to benefit in a material way from the tax cuts are going to have to pay back the debt that's incurred to give them to people who, as the senator from Georgia said, aren't even asking for, really. Many of whom know that we are in a situation where we've got the worst, income inequality that we've had since the 1920s. And that we should be thinking about how to build that middle class again, give people the chance to get into the middle class again, which is what we should be focused on. So there is a set of priorities here that somehow makes sense when it gets to Washington, D.C., but surely doesn't make sense in the towns and cities of this country, and is a choice that would never be made. A choice to hurt the people that that now are going to have to go without health care. A choice to blow a massive hole in the deficit, not to invest in the country, but to cut taxes for the wealthiest people. Why don't we have a tax cut for working people? Why don't we have a tax cut for the middle class? Why don't we expand the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit for working people here? Mr. President, I'm going to finish, but I do want to read some letters that have been written to me from people in Colorado who are deeply concerned about these cuts to Medicaid. And I want to say also that a word of thank you to the people that have come to my town halls, sometimes with their children with disabilities, to advocate on behalf of their children, to advocate on behalf of children all over our state and all over the country, whose lifeline is this health care program that is being cut in this budget. And there were so many people that wrote in. The number one issue, when we have these town halls, we write down the questions that aren't asked. The number one issue is Medicaid, because the people that have loved ones who are on the program, who know it's going to be cut, know that they've got nowhere else to turn. And that's why they're there at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night with their children when their children should be home in bed. Because they want people here to understand what it's going to mean to their families if these cuts go into place. So the first letter is from Barbara of Greenwood Village. We are 86-year-old parents. We are 86-year-old parents of our 53-year-old nonverbal autistic son, who we had become physically unable to care for him in our home anymore. We were able to place him in a host home May 29, 2024, where he is being provided a safe and caring environment. He requires 24/7 supervision to be given his needed daily medications. And seeing that he gets all needed doctors and dental appointments and continues to do so, without continuing Medicaid's current level of support, we are terrified that these needs may not continue to be met. As aging parents, 86-year-old parents, we are greatly concerned about these proposed huge cuts to Medicaid funding. It's so important to us to know that all these supports will still be in place after we are gone and unable to advocate for him. Please help us to do this by not cutting Medicaid benefits. Exclamation point, exclamation point. The next letter is from Mitchell and Thornton. I am writing to urge you to protect and strengthen Medicaid for individuals with disabilities. My daughter, who was adopted at age 10, is now 21, but has the cognitive level of a 5-year-old. She has Fragile X syndrome, ADHD, PTSD, anxiety, and possible fetal alcohol syndrome. She requires constant supervision, behavioral support, and medical care beyond what private insurance covers. Medicaid is essential for her survival and quality of life. It provides funding for adult programs that give her purpose, medical equipment, and living assistant expenses that most families couldn't afford. No family could afford. Without Medicaid, she and many others like her would be left without critical care, increasing the risk of institutionalization or homelessness. Medicaid also plays a vital role in adoption. Many children with disabilities, like my daughter, find forever families because Medicaid provides the financial support needed to care for them. Without it, fewer families would be able to adopt, leaving more children to age out of the system without the care they desperately need. Please support Medicaid funding and policies that ensure individuals with disabilities receive the care and dignity they deserve. Thank you for your time and dedication to this critical issue. The care, I'd say, that all of us deserve. Erica from Johnstown. My son has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. His care alone, without Medicaid waivers, will cost us at least $1 million per year. Medicaid allows me to be paid to take care of my child and not rely on nursing care. Medicaid has really helped him get the best care possible without having to worry about the cost, and to be able to have his parent there to take care of him. Samuel from Denver. My name is Samuel, and I moved to Denver with my wife Cynthia and our son Joaquin just over a year ago. Welcome. In order to have his complex medical issues treated at Children's Hospital of Colorado. Medicaid has, without a doubt, without exaggeration, saved our lives. My wife is paid as our son's caregiver when she would otherwise be unable to work. Joaquin has received services ranging from medications that prevent constant pain to, before our move, air ambulance flights from Albuquerque to CHCO, including several life-saving surgeries. Losing funding for Medicaid directly translates to unnecessary suffering and even loss of life for Joaquin and countless children like him. Please do not allow that to happen. Mr. President, I can't tell you the number of parents I have met who have spent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in care of their own children, but are able to do it because of the small payment that is made by Medicaid. What are these parents supposed to do if this is cut? How are we going to meet the moral obligation of this country to our children with this cut? A letter from Brittany in Denver. My son has autism, a developmental disability, and a speech delay. He cannot be in a typical daycare or even go to preschool due to the high level of support he requires. Medicaid pays for his speech therapy and occupational therapy. After just 6 months of ABA therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy, Jackson is now speaking. He's not as aggressive, and he's getting better with managing his sensory issues that he struggles with daily. Without Medicaid, we would not be able to pay for our home or food, as I am his paid caregiver through Medicaid. I cannot work a typical job. It is important that he receives these therapies and supports from Medicaid, as well as me, so that our family can survive and has the highest, the brightest future possible. If anything is taken away from him or us, it will be detrimental. Please give my son and our small family a fighting chance. Thank you. Barbara from Greenwood Village. Our son Derek is autistic and nonverbal. His dad and I are 86 plus. And it became hard for us to take care of him. We wanted to be sure he would be in a safe and secure situation and happy there. On May 29th of this year, we were able to find a host home for him to live in. He's doing well there. He has people that take him out in the community 6 days a week to enjoy being out and about, which is very important to his happiness and well-being. We pray that Medicaid will continue to support him in continuing this new way of life for him. Our community of people with disabilities desperately need help. Sasha from Fountain. I have a 9-year-old wheelchair-bound daughter with cerebral palsy. She depends on me 100%. She depends on me 24/7, morning, day, and night. I change her, dress her, get her out of bed, feed her, bathe her, drive her to therapy and other appointments, exercise, massage, and physical therapy at home, give her her medications, get her ready for bed, and help her in the middle of the night if she wakes up. Because she depends on me. I'm unable to get a job outside of the house. And that is why I depend on this waiver. I would rather care for my daughter, give her the quality care and love she deserves, than hire a stranger and depend on them to take care of my child. Without the waiver, I wouldn't be able to afford to stay home and make sure she is safe and happy. Thanks to the waiver, she has the therapy she needs. It's a crisis, and we need Congress to ensure that everyone has access to home and community-based services right now. It is a crisis. It is a crisis. It is a crisis in the richest country in the world. And now we're going to provoke this crisis. We're going to make it even worse. We're going to destabilize these families for what? So we can give tax cuts to the wealthiest people in America? Why don't you just not do that part of the bill? Why don't you just not do that part of the bill? This economy has shoveled benefits for 50 years on the wealthiest people in our country. Do we want to compound that unfairness with a set of tax policies like the ones that are being pursued here, and turn around and cut health care for the most vulnerable people in America? If you are concerned about waste, fraud, and abuse, go after waste, fraud, and abuse. But don't make people's lives even more painful. Don't make people's lives even more difficult. Don't force parents to actually leave their household where there's no one else to take care of their children. No one would make these choices in one of our communities at home. I'd like to hear a city council meeting where these were the choices that were being made. Cut health care for the poorest people in the country. Borrow as much money as we've ever borrowed. Give the benefit to the 2 wealthiest neighborhoods in town. It doesn't make any sense. Here's a letter from Bryce in Denver. When I sustained a cervical spinal cord injury from a shallow water diving accident at age 20, the only thing I was certain of was my future aspirations and independence were finished. I had plenty of time to think about what I had lost as a quadriplegic during my 45-day in the ICU. But as I began my rehabilitation, I learned about Medicaid and home and community-based services. And by the time I returned home, I had set up home health care services that allowed me to receive the needed care to be independent throughout the day, and enabled my parents to continue working. By the time 1 year had passed after my accident, I was back living on my college's campus and taking a full slate of classes. As I write this, I am a staff attorney at the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, an organization I dreamed of contributing to professionally when I was a volunteer advocate over a decade ago. I continue to benefit from daily home health care through a consumer-directed program available through Colorado Medicaid, and can pay for medical appointments and services, physical therapy, and occupational therapy services, which keep me healthy enough to continuously contribute to disability rights advocacy across the state and the nation. In no uncertain terms, Medicaid's home and community-based services repeatedly open the door of opportunity for me to live a meaningful, independent life. Without these services, I would be unemployed, living either with my parents or in a nursing facility. Home and community-based services represent American values of equal opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. They represent our societal commitment to providing and promoting those opportunities to all citizens. And these values and commitments manifested in Medicaid services are the sole reason that I've been able to overcome quadriplegia and live a purposeful, beautiful life. My name is Kaylin Rose. She's from Denver. And I was born with a rare condition, osteogenesis imperfecta. My mother lost count of all my broken bones at a young age, but it is certainly over 100 fractures and likely 50-plus surgeries now. Because of my access to Medicaid, I have been able to get life-supporting surgeries, emergency room visits, and wheelchairs that I would not otherwise receive. Thanks to Medicaid, I live a full life as an artist, educator, mentor, and community advocate based in Denver, Colorado. I would certainly not be who I am today. Without life-saving medical expenses, I would never be able to afford myself. I am currently caring for my now disabled mother, who also relies on Medicaid and support services. Without Medicaid, I, my family, and millions of others would be left to die. Medicaid is a lifeline for so many of us, and we all deserve access to health care in the richest, most powerful country known to humankind. I couldn't have said that better myself. Nearly 1.3 million Coloradans like Kaylin rely on Health First Colorado and CHIP to get health coverage. 500,000 of them are children. These cuts would affect more than half of Colorado seniors who rely on Health First Colorado to help pay for nursing homes because they literally can't afford to die anywhere else. From birth to death, our Medicaid programs are a lifeline for my constituents and for millions of Americans. My colleague from Georgia started his speech by saying that a budget is a moral document. I could not agree with him more, and I think we should reconsider. In the face of the advocacy that we're hearing, whether these are the best choices we can make, and of course they're not. In a rational world, we'd be figuring out how to get everybody health care in this country and do it for less money than these other countries are spending, just as they're doing. And we'd be able to use the savings from that to pay down our deficit if we wanted to do that, or invest in our military if we wanted to do that, or invest in our roads and our bridges if we wanted to do that, or in the mental health of our children if we cared to do that. Those are the choices that we should be making tonight. I want to finish just by thanking again the people that have come to my town hall meetings, the people that have brought their loved ones, especially their children, to those town hall meetings, to the people that took the time to write, who have not given up on the idea that they can have a voice in this democracy. That the decisions that this place can make can actually align with the priorities that they have. They're not asking for anything here except the chance to continue to take care of their children, to take care of their parents, to take care of their loved ones, to be contributing members of our society. We should support their ambition for themselves. We should support their ambition for our country. We should find a better way of supporting them. And we should shelve this budget, which is going to do nothing but harm the American people. Mr. President, with that, I thank you for your patience. I thank the staff for being here so late tonight, even though tonight's lateness is going to be nothing compared to tomorrow night's lateness. And with that, I'm going to ask if I can find my glasses. Mr. President, I'm going to ask unanimous consent to amend the previous order so that the Senate stand adjourned until 8:30 a.m. with all other provisions of the order remaining in effect.
Without objection, the Senate stays adjourned until 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you. You all too.